Now, we have gotten a lot of very, very moving calls on dyslexia, particularly from people who weren't diagnosed in childhood with dyslexia and felt that it ended up holding them back in later life. Anne, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Very good. You, though, refused to let your dyslexia or your lack of diagnosis in childhood limit you or your career ambitions.
No, I did. I absolutely did. I knew I had a problem with spelling and writing, so I used to avoid it. And if somebody wrote me a letter, I wouldn't write back. I'd avoid it. I'd send a card or I'd make a call. I remember when I was very young, a teacher put two rulers together and slapped me 3 times in each hand and put me out by the piano every day for a couple of years. And the schools amalgamated. I was sent to another school in 4th class. I had the same problem with that 4th class teacher. And in 6th class, she was an absolute nightmare. I remember her nose used to go red to purple because I wasn't able to spell. So she used to just dismiss me. But I managed to muddle through, and I went to secondary school, and I managed to get through my intercert, which was fine. And 5th class, or 5th year, preparing for Leaving Cert, I remember the maths teacher walking in, called out 10 of her names and said, "I'm not teaching you." She hadn't met me before. She'd never met me through the years. So I think she just assumed that I wasn't going to be able to do maths. I remember coming home and telling my father. He was very upset and insisted that they did teach me maths, but he helped me through. And then the last 6 weeks before Leaving Cert, I got some grinds, and I got through my Leaving Cert, including maths and English and Irish. And then I went to Secretarial College, Business College, and there I was getting first-class honours in everything, and I couldn't work this out. And it was because I was touch typing. I wasn't looking at what I was writing, so I was transferring it onto paper at an easier rate.
So all you had to do was just take handwriting out of the equation and suddenly you're flying.
I was able to work on it that way. Now my spelling was still wrong, but I could get over that because it was just better. But when you were typing everything, it was easier than writing it. And yes, my brain was able to type it through my fingers, through touch, as opposed to read and feel.
Had you lost out though, Anne, on not learning more about how to learn, if you know what I mean, in school?
Absolutely, because I was quite bright, but I couldn't transfer that onto paper. I retained a lot of information. Everything I learned was through memory and retained it through memory. But I'd say when I was sitting exams, I lost out on spelling so badly. And then every job I hit, I managed to make managerial level, which was huge for me. But during that time, when I was 24, I had a crash, which set me back 9 years. But when I went back to work, I hit managerial level on anything I ever did. And I have since graduated in business studies, childcare, beauty therapy, and I'm now a style and image consultant.
And
I've worked my way through.
Did getting managerial level jobs allow you to delegate the writing to somebody else?
Absolutely.
Was that your way around it, yeah?
Absolutely, yes, or I would do it myself. But when you have a typewriter, it's different. Typing something out is easier than writing it down. And I always carried a dictionary. And now life is so much easier with spell check on the computer. It makes life... And we've had that now for the last 10 years, which is fantastic. And that's how I managed to get 500 points. And I didn't accept it, but I could have gone to UCC in the last couple of years, sitting one of those courses, which it was never afforded to me when I was in school.
But it's amazing, isn't it, to go from being slapped with rulers and sent out of the class every single day.
Out beside the piano every day, without fail for 3 years or more.
What does it say about the intelligence of the teachers, though?
I think they
kept on doing the same thing and getting the same bad result, and just never thought of sitting down with this poor child and examining it a bit more closely.
That she used to ridicule me just for her own enjoyment and for the other, as an example to the others in the class.
Why? What would she say? What would she say?
She wasn't very nice. She'd have her zoobs up in the desk, and she'd be sucking her zoobs, and now we'll try Anne, and that would be it. And it just was never very nice. And I remember another one of the teachers saying, and she's so polite, you can't give out to her. You know, they wanted, because I couldn't spell, they wanted to ridicule me. It was never very nice. You know, secondary school was definitely better until I met that 5th year teacher, the maths teacher. That was awful as well.
It sounds though like your dad was very important as well.
Oh God, he was. He would sit at the kitchen table with me every evening and get me through maths. And we would work it out together. And we had a business, and if he couldn't do it himself, he would go and ask some of his customers, do you know how to do this? Because there were teachers and stuff that used to come in.
Really?
Yep.
And did any of those other teachers or anybody else ever say, I think Anne might be dyslexic? Did anybody?
No, never. Nobody. I worked it out for myself.
How did you work it? I mean, if you weren't...
I just knew, because if I was writing, I couldn't remember how to spell. If I was trying to spell gone or done, do I put the E before the N or the N before the E?
I know, but where did you first hear about dyslexia? Because presumably you couldn't go and read about it.
No, just through work, through listening to the radio, through my nieces and nephews going through school, stuff like that. I kind of, listening to the radio, I said, well, maybe that's what's wrong with me. I came to understand it myself. But it didn't hold me back. I always camouflaged it. I winged my way through everything, most things. But I will say one thing. My father insisted that we did elocution lessons, us girls. There were 4 of us. And I am convinced if you speak well and you present yourself well, you will get through anything.
People will overlook an awful lot of other things, indeed.
They do.
Let me bring in Eddie. Good afternoon, Eddie. How are you?
How are you doing, Philip?
Going to have to
you have
turn
to go
the car on and drive.
All right. And it was lovely talking to you. Thank you very much for
I'm very sorry I
for
can't
your call.
continue.
All right.
There are ways around it. There are ways of camouflaging it. You don't need to let people know. And if they call you stupid, just look better than them. Smarten yourself up. Draw your attention away from everything. Fix your hair. Put on something nicer than everybody else.
And you are living proof of that, Anne. Listen, thank you very much for your call. 1-857-15815. Eddie, just picking up on one of the things that Anne was saying there. How do you end up learning if you have never learned how to learn because the teacher has been kicking you out of the class every day?
Well, I learned actually from my own children. I made sure that they all went to college. And when I went back, I used to ask them about how do I do this, how do I do that. That's how it worked for me. But I did have to learn how to learn in the sense of when I left school at 14, which is 50 years ago. Like I left because you were just getting beaten every day by a teacher or a brother or a Christian brother or somebody. It started with the nuns like at 4 and it continued on until I was 14. So I just got help from my kids.
You must have been terrified of your teachers.
Oh, shocking, yeah, of course you would be. When you hear, say, I'll give you one instance, when you hear a man walking down and he has hard leather shoes and you hear click, click, click on the floor and you cringe even though you're not doing anything because you're waiting on the bang in the back of your head, how could you possibly learn? And that individual, who I won't name, became a vice principal of a very big school in Dublin.
And all because you weren't actually dyslexic, you just had poor handwriting.
Yeah, poor handwriting.
And all because your handwriting just wasn't as good as everybody else in the class.
Well, no, he didn't need that. That didn't need to be a reason. This was just, you'd be walking, you'd be doing something, you'd have your head down reading, and you'd just get a bang on the back of the head. That'd be it. Simple, straightforward. Cruelty, really. You know? And the Christian brothers were the same, and any other teacher that came in would be the same. We were out in the yard one day, and one of the teachers went by with his wife, and someone whistled at her. And everybody got 10 slaps of a leather strap. Did you ever see the leather strap?
Well, fortunately, I went to a school where, even though it was before 1982, they were enlightened enough not to actually use corporal
punishment. The leather
punishment.
strap was about 18 inches long. I work with measurements all the time. I was a flooring contractor. Now I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist. It's about 18 inches long, 2 inches wide, about a quarter of an inch thick, and you would just hold out your hand. But some of the brothers used to turn it so that it was twisted rather than flat and hit you across the fingers. And my abiding memory was that putting your hand on the metal legs of the desk to take the pain away and to cool them down. That's what the Christian Brothers and the teachers. I mean, the Christian teachers were just as bad as the Christian Brothers, by the way.
They were following their example. You said something
they were equal
there,
opportunity, yeah.
You gave your CV in just one line there, which tells its own story, that you left school and ended up becoming a flooring contractor, where presumably you were able to avoid reading and writing as much as possible.
Yeah.
But now you're a psychotherapist.
Yeah, now I trained to be a counsellor and psychotherapist, yeah. And I volunteered every Monday. I still work as a flooring contractor, but I volunteer every Monday.
And how did you manage that? Did computers make it easier, or was it your kids who re-educated you?
I didn't have to write, so I could use the computer, because my daughter studied computing. And slowly but surely I learned how to use one, and I just didn't have to physically write. My writing has improved over time because I've got more confidence as an individual. But I use the computer for all projects. But I don't fear filling in forms anymore, which I used to. Like, go for a driver's license. Like, if I wrote my name something today, I couldn't read it tomorrow. That's how bad it was after 10 years in school.
And was it the lack of confidence that held you back as much as the handwriting?
No, I had plenty of confidence. That's what helped me to become a flooring contractor. Like, I worked with my father. We both worked together in the company, and I eventually became foreman, and then I eventually became a contractor on my own right. And then when I was 58, I went back to study to be a counsellor. That's what I got. But I always made sure my kids went to college, like, you know.
Yeah, but the point is, Eddie, that as much as you managed to turn it around in later life, there is this huge gap in the middle of your life,
where I could have done. Yeah. I probably could have done better with encouragement from a teacher, but you never got encouragement from a teacher. You never did, and maybe you did if you could play Gaelic. Yeah. But one of the Christian Brothers, if you could play Gaelic, you would definitely get encouragement.
Just like Anne said, use something else to distract. In her case, maybe dressing up, and many other boys. I'd say, what you could do on the playing pitch would be what would be save you. All right, Eddie, thank you very much for your call.
All right, not at all, Philip.
Back to dyslexia. Carol, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Philip.
Keyboards. It's all about computers, really, isn't it? And it could just completely revolutionise how we deal with dyslexia.
Well, isn't this what the modern life is all about now? Children, are so exposed to IT that certainly keyboarding skills are a huge element of, developing self-esteem in kids to be able to do things rather than that feeling of being unable to do things.
So that they don't get held back or sat upon in any other area of their development. You can't cure the dyslexia, but at least you can stop it inhibiting their learning.
It's a skill, and it's a life skill, and I've been teaching this now since 2009. It's a course called Touch, Type, Read and Spell. And it's certainly turned around, in my own family. My daughter actually learned to touch type at age 10 using this program. And while I was watching her, I was so enthused by what was going on. The tutor asked would I like to train to teach it, and I've been teaching it since 2009. And there's no doubt in my mind that the students have a skill for life, as I said, but more particularly that sense of self-esteem that they deserve to have. I mean, these children don't deserve to be this way. It's not something they would have looked for. But, that feeling that they have of not being able to do is completely turned around, and they have that feel that is just completely reversed.
And take me through the course, Carol. I mean, how long a course is it, and how long before the child is touch typing fluently?
Well, the course is broken down into 24 levels, and each level has a number of modules, and there are particularly 30 modules in every level. Most students probably would get through the course in a year. Now, that's a year based on school term time, because I teach this as an after-school activity during that time. Mm-hmm. So there would be nothing done during the summertime or the months or Christmas or Easter or whatever. So for a period of weeks, they would progress at their own pace. And that's the wonderful thing about this course, that the students don't feel they have to keep up with anyone else.
How long is each class then after school?
1 hour.
And what age are you teaching from?
From 8 years up to 17-year-olds who are currently perhaps hoping to sit their Leaving Cert next year.
So you're telling me if you're starting at 8, that by age 9, or by the start of the new school year when they're going into whatever 5th class, that they could be touch typing fluently?
Absolutely, and they're using that then in their class, presenting work in a legible way, being able to input what the knowledge that they have, they're actually able to put that down clearly, instead of this business of rubbing out and that feeling of, gosh, it looks so untidy on the page.
And explain something to me here that I don't understand about dyslexia as a disease, or as a condition rather, that how do you... because obviously you're using the touch typing to get around the handwriting difficulties, but how do you then teach the kids how to spell properly and help them with that part of the condition?
Well, I think dyslexia is possibly always going to be there, but the fact that there's such repetition in this course that it does reinforce the learning ability of the child. There are 4,000 words in the programme, and over all of the modules, all of these words are repeated time and time again. And, some students feel they're being brainwashed. One student said to me, I feel I'm being brainwashed here. And I said, well, does it work? If you are repeating something time and time again, it will eventually sink in. It's not going to change the situation of having dyslexia. I hate that word anyway, being dyslexic. It's a condition out there. It's not a label. But it certainly does help reinforcing it. Okay, so
just good old-fashioned rote learning and repetition, and you'll
repetition. But the feeling that they have of being able to touch type, it enables them to think and type. So they all of a sudden, instead of all of this writing and rewriting and pulling out pages and having rubbers and all that sort of thing, taking away from the fact that they spend so much time, drafting and redrafting. Sit down at a computer and being able to type.
But just as importantly, Carol, you're teaching them something which is now an absolutely essential skill. And I say this from first-hand experience, that I feel handicapped in the workplace with my rather cumbersome 2-finger and a thumb on each hand kind of typing, that I'm not touch typing properly. I should be able to type 80, 90 words a minute if I had concentrated on learning how to do this properly, but instead I'm at a rather slow 40 words a minute.
Well, I have students from 8 years old, and after halfway through the course, they get that, a little light switch goes on, and they get that feeling of, being able to talk to me. I can talk to them as I'm tutoring them, and they turn their head from the computer. They're hearing the words in the headpiece that they're using, and they're still typing, and they feel that that's really empowering them. It's almost like, watch me, what I can do, instead of this feeling of, I can't really do very much with all of this problem that I have,
Very good, Carol. What's the course called?
It's called Touch, Type, Read and Spell, and it's I would highly recommend it for children with learning difficulties, whether it's dyspraxia or dyslexia or any other area where they're actually just going to be able to present their work clearly and cleanly.
Okay. Thanks very much for your call, Carol. Take care.
You're very welcome. Goodbye.
Talk to Joe
from too much leniency in the modern era, as opposed to too little leniency in our not too distant past. We're going to go back to corporal punishment. Eamon, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Philip. I'm fine, thank you.
What, you would have to wonder, were people thinking in your case? What did they think was going to be the beneficial effect of slapping a 4-year-old child for painting?
It is difficult, actually, to understand that in present-day circumstances. But at that time, in the 1950s I'm speaking about, there was a culture, and it was actually like an atmosphere in the classroom of fear as an instrument for teaching. And that fear went right through my primary education. And it was hard to understand that as a young person, why anybody would use fear as a means of to acquire some knowledge or information or something useful in your education. And that's basically it.
Did it work? I mean, did it work insofar as it turned you all into little automatons who behaved properly in class?
Well, you can be sure, actually, that nobody stepped out of line as regards behaviour or anything like that. But I was really trying to communicate with you on the issue of learning.
Of learning, absolutely. I have no doubt that it can't have helped with learning. Not if you're thinking about how you avoid getting a slap.
Well, then you just keep your mouth shut and keep your head down. But as regards learning, I mean, that atmosphere was not conducive to learning at all. And you quoted something there that I remember the first day in school with a nun who gave me a twig to paint a picture on a piece of paper. And when she came around to look at it, she turned it over and the paint had come through the paper. And the first thing she said, out with your hand, and a wallop for it, because the paint went through the paper.
And you had a twig and not a paintbrush to paint. I mean, what?
Well, there was no paintbrushes then. There was just twigs, and you put it in a jar and you rubbed the paint onto the paper. And the irony of the situation is that I ended up actually in the National College of Art later in my life. So, in other words, it wasn't because of what she did, but it was because of my determination. But basically, there was a fear everywhere, and particularly amongst the Christian brothers, because after leaving the nuns, they were actually, in their own right, probably not as violent or as actually abusive to children as the Christian brothers were. And the Christian brothers really, I mean, that was an eye-opener when I went to the Christian brothers. But I must say, though, there was one person in my primary school life, and that was a lay teacher. And he really opened the Pandora's box for me and taught me everything you need to know about how to acquire information. And he was actually in 5th year and 6th year. And the difference was so completely, it was so different to a student in a classroom to be eager and willing to and wanting to acquire information. And the two contrasts were side by side.
Well, thank God for that. And isn't it amazing that I'm assuming that we're talking 50 years on, that you still have such strong memories for that one man who shaped your early life?
I have, and he's still alive.
Is he really?
He's 90 years of age, and I won't mention his name because he might be embarrassed, but he is still alive, and I am grateful to him because what he used to do was at that time we weren't allowed into libraries. Children weren't allowed into libraries because they made noise.
Did you ever hear anything so ridiculous in your life?
Exactly, but that was the behaviour in the school of teachers, but not into a library. But he brought books with him into the classroom, and I remember he opened one day, and it was absolutely unbelievable stuff. It was on family history and coats of arms, and he opened the pages and said what was in it, passed it around, and when I saw the Walsh coat of arms, I sketched it as fast as I could because I was so eager. And from then onwards, I was always interested in heraldry and family history.
Hold the line there. Seamus, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
You were humiliated by your teacher because you were from a council estate.
Yeah, that is the way it was back in 1969, 1970, 71. Oh yes, if your dad pushed a shovel to earn a living, you were totally humiliated. If your dad owned a golf club, drove a car, there was never an issue. And of course, if you did want to go to the toilet, you weren't allowed to go to the toilet. He'd say to you, ask in Irish, you'd ask in Irish, and he'd say, lectris mo, lectris biog, you'd say, lectris biog, no, you're not going out, that's it. So you sat there and you wet yourself. And that's the way it was every day. You had such fear in yourself. And then when the teacher would be walking behind you, he'd stand behind you, look down at you doing your work, and you cringe because you never knew when you were going to get a fist into the back of the head.
And did you get caned?
Oh, caned, that's the understatement. It was called Betsy. And he used to say, this hurts me more than it hurts you.
Oh,
and he made you bend down, backside in the air, and you had to tip your toes without bending your knees. And he made you do that until you didn't bend your knees. And then he would batter you with the cane across the backside.
How many times?
Oh, probably 4 or 5 times.
And for what was that for?
Well, it
bad
could be
homework?
for anything. Maybe if you turned around and looked at the fella behind you, if you looked to the side. One particular incident, we had the inkwells with a slidey little plate, filled the inkwells, and one particular guy saw a fly in the inkwell, leaned over, of course, blew into the inkwell to get the fly out. The ink went everywhere. He rushed in, he heard the commotion, and everybody, and I mean everybody in that class, got bet so hard that they were crying.
Don't mention his name,
No,
Seamus.
I won't
Please don't mention his name.
No,
but
I
tell
wouldn't.
me, did you ever meet this sadist later in life?
No, because he died shortly after I left school. And I wrote him a letter. I wrote him a letter, and in the letter I told him that I hope that when he dies, he's buried face down, and that if he does wake up, he'll dig, and he'll end up in hell, where he belongs. And I also told him that when he does die, I'm going to go out and piss on his grave, because he was an evil man. And he used to put his hand up your trousers, and he used to put your trousers, you wore short pants, and he used to put your leg onto the radiator and push it down and burn you. And then he'd put his hand up and he'd touch the top of your penis. And then, of course, he'd leave the room and go out and he'd do whatever he had to do after that. He was evil.
No,
he was evil. He put fear in everybody.
An understatement to say that.
And one other teacher, 25 years after I left school, my dad was making a communion, and he was ushering everybody into the aisle of the school, into the church, and he grabbed me by the hand to usher me in, and I got the smell of his aftershave. Well, I was a second away from killing him. I felt that he was going to hit me again, as he did do all them years ago, because he wore the same aftershave. And he'd grab you by the arm and he'd swing you around and he'd slap your head off the blackboard. And if there was writing on the blackboard, he'd stick your head against the blackboard and he'd move it up and down and he'd clean the blackboard with your head. Oh. Then he'd throw you on the ground. One other incident, the guy, he asked him, Kade Yishka? And the guy, I don't know. So he picked up a glass of water, took the flowers out of it and said, Kade Yishka. The guy still didn't know, and he threw it into his face, Shine Yishka, and then he boxed him in the face.
That was
normal. That was every day.
Did you ever make your peace with what happened to you, or does it still haunt you every day?
It still haunts me. Only about 5-7 weeks ago, I was in the national school, and I was with my wife voting, and as I walked by the cloakroom, the toilets, I got this smell. And I had to run out. I had to actually leave. I had to go. If I was talking to anybody, I had to just go. The fear came over me. And I still had nightmares. And when you did wet yourself in school, you had to take your jumper off, face it to the front, and tie the sleeves around the back to cover the piddle stains. That's the way it was. And, every day was terrible. And if you were queuing up to go into the school and you saw the teacher driving up in his car, you knew by the expression on his face what type of a day you were going to have. He was evil. He bordered on the brink of perversion, he did.
Well, no, I'm sorry, he crossed the line over into perversion, what you're saying. But,
he did.
Was there nobody you could turn to and nobody you could point out, look, this man is a monster and this monster is in charge of young children? No, he did it to everybody. Anybody that worked in a council estate or lived in a council estate, because most of the area that I grew up in had council estates. There was very few private houses. You know what I mean? It was a small presumably that was his background as well, and that was what he was trying to run away from, yeah?
Oh, yeah, no, he was evil. He was evil. My God, he was evil. And if there is a hell, he's down there now. And I hope he's burning. And I mean, even when we do go out to party gatherings, weddings, and you meet up with the guys that you grew up with, their names will always come up, and there is anger among everybody. Anger. Now, there is still one teacher, he's left alive, but the other guys two other teachers are well gone. But, oh my God.
Eamon, yeah?
Philip, there was one thing there that your other caller there had mentioned. Seamus, is it? Yes. Seamus. The one thing actually that you thought that you could do was actually when you have a classroom activity such as that you're just after describing there, was to go to your parents to tell them. But you got to remember also that the parents at that time were afraid to intervene in any way because of the fact that they would draw down more difficulty on the child attending the classroom with a person like that. And therefore it continued on because you had nobody to go to. And if you take it a step further, you go beyond that, you have the question of, who do you tell? There is nobody to tell. So that's an extraordinary situation to be in, not to be able to outline to somebody and ask for help or assistance or to ask for advice even. Because if you go with the step further I've just mentioned, and that is the church. Every year in the Catholic Church around the 1950s, I always gone to school, you would have the missions once a year in which fire and brimstone was poured from the pulpit. So therefore, the parents were being actually abused by fear as well
And
in the churches.
Seamus, tell me, was your teacher a lay teacher or a priest?
No, he's a priest.
So
But
there
it's
you were betrayed by your school. You were betrayed by your church. You were betrayed, I suppose, on some levels by your parents. Do you feel now, with the benefit of whatever it is, 40, 45 years hindsight, that you were betrayed by Ireland as well?
Of course I was. And when I went to secondary school, and I saw the bigger guys, and I saw what I would have thought at the time, bigger teachers, I said, oh my God, if we got that the way we did in national school, what is it going to be like in the secondary school?
Uh-huh.
But the first teacher we had, he was a beautiful man. Tony Flavin, mechanical drawing, woodwork teacher. He was only magnificent.
You must have almost cried tears of relief.
Yeah, I did. I loved him. He was like my dad. Like my dad died in 1971. But he was like he was just excellent. Tony Flavin from Balbriggan, taught in the Swords Tech. He was only a beautiful man. Of course, along with the other teachers.
Seamus there has just put his finger on it again. Once you get a good teacher, one good teacher is all you need to blossom and to allow your mind to develop. And after coming through what he's just described, imagine having a classroom where you liked being in it and when you loved the subject. God, the difference it makes.
Yes, it does. It's incredible, the feeling. You want to go to school. You want to go to school. But it's just indescribable. I used to have nightmares, and I went to bed up till I was about 13. I don't mind saying that on air. I did, from the fear. They put fear into you. And even if I hear a loud bang, or if I see something, I went to see the film Catholic Boys. And when that film came on, and when that pupil stood up and hit that teacher, I'd say 60% of the people in the cinema in O'Connell Street jumped up and cheered, and I was one of them. Because they felt that they should have been able to do it. And we were delighted that the teacher got what he was entitled to. And I wondered if I saw that teacher today that used to beat me, if I knocked the crap out of him, I'd go to prison. And I wonder, would I get away with doing what I've just done if I explained to the judge what he did to me as an indefenseless kid of 5 foot?
And the awful thing is, no, you wouldn't.
But this teacher was 6'2".
Yeah.
He was about 16 stone, and I'm 5 foot.
But you know something that I just found out during the course of the week that I wasn't aware of before? Corporal punishment is not actually illegal in this country.
No?
We just changed the policy in 1982, or rather the Department of Education changed the policy on the use of corporal punishment in schools in 1982 to make it not policy. But it's still legal. You can still do it.
Yeah, but what infuriates me now, when I look at a 10-year-old child now, and I see how vulnerable and how weak they are, and I compare him or her to a man of 6 foot, and I look and say, how could that man hit that kid the way we were hit and get away with it? You know what I mean? If I saw anybody hitting anybody now, you try to stop them. But these teachers they did everything they could to you. They got joy out of it. They got pleasure out of hitting your head off the blackboard and kicking you and pushing you on the ground.
Hold the line there, Seamus. I think you're going to be interested in this. Larry O'Toole, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Philip.
You got a slap in school, but you don't have bad memories of it or bad thoughts about the people who did it.
Although I'm living in Dublin nearly all my life now, I went to a very small school in West Wicklow, and I have nothing but fond memories now, right through the teacher. And one of the teachers, he did give us a slap on the hand. And there's a comical side to this. He had these off his hand. He would never hit you anywhere else, maybe a small slap on the hand. And he had this cane and a little bit of thing on the end of it. It would hardly hurt you. But the school was beside a river. And we were forever getting big canes and throwing them into the river. And he would never say anything, but he had an endless supply. The next morning, he'd take another one out of the desk. But I have nothing but the best of memories of that school.
Well, you don't, Larry, because maybe you were a little bit more robust and a bit more able to cope with it and a little bit less picked on by that teacher. But there must have been other lads in that class who had the fear of God sideways in them.
No, he never did. He was I mean, I suppose in my time, and like I would say, speak for all the ones who were in my class, mind you, had two classes because, small school, you had a big crowd. And I'd say some people, you never even got a slap. And any of us that did, might have got 2 or 3 in a couple of years. And like he was also
Larry,
very talented.
Are you saying that there is a justification then in any circumstances?
No, I'm not saying there's a justification. I'm just telling you my own experience and my classmates' experience, boys and girls. Now, I mean, as I say,
I know, but you seem to be saying, Larry, in fairness, Asher, it didn't do me any harm.
Well, it didn't do me any harm, to be honest with you. Like, I mean, I got about 3 slaps in 2 years. And, outside of that, and I'm not condoning in any shape or form corporal punishment or abuse of, physical abuse in schools, not at all. And I didn't, and neither did my classmates. And, we meet now and then.
But Larry, I know, but Larry, is the point not that, that one person's 1 or 2 slaps in the course of a couple of years that never did me any harm is another person's pure abject terror? Well,
to be quite honest with you, and during the time, and it's a long time ago, and also since then when I'd meet, some of them were my cousins and some of them were neighbours, all of us look back fondly on that couple of years. Now, and I'm not making a case. I did experience, when I went to secondary school, I did experience horrific physical abuse by one teacher and one teacher only. And it was horrific. It was just horrific. I experienced that, but I like to look back on the the warm side of the school, and the warmth and the health and the education. I mean, I think the teachers I had in primary school were probably way ahead of their time regarding.
But they weren't way, Larry. Larry, they weren't way ahead of their time if they were slapping you.
Look, I got about 3 slaps in 2 years.
You get 3 a day here.
And you'd have to be kind of very bold to get a slap off that teacher. He never, he didn't punish me. There was like a little slap.
Are there not better ways of communicating with a young child?
There probably would have been better, and I'm looking back on a time when there were other teachers who were being cruel to children. But look, I mean, I have to say, I had 3 teachers in that school because it was a very small school, so we just went through 3 teachers, and I remember a temporary teacher also, and I have nothing but the best of memories now in the school, to be quite honest with you.
Peter Sheridan, good afternoon. How are you?
Philip, how are you doing?
You've written around this before, haven't you? The fact that there's absolutely no learning takes place in an atmosphere of fear.
That's totally true. And certainly my experience at primary school was that it was an ever-present, everyday occurrence that kids were afraid. And I mean, to the point where, a kid would be asked his name, he would say, I don't know, sir. Yeah. It was just, the fear was so complete. Kids would pee in their pants with the fear of the consequences of getting a question wrong or an answer wrong. The thing of pushing Gaelic down kids' throats to the point where they had absolutely no knowledge of what the language was about, and yet the aspiration was that everybody should be able to have conversational Irish, but it was just totally dominated by fear. I mean, the classic story I've always told, I've recorded this in my book 44, was a kid who was slapped down in the kit room, which was outside of the class, but we could hear it. A kid being slapped across the bum with a leather. And his father came up the next day to the school, called his son up and made him take down his trousers in front of the class to show us what the brother had done to him, which he did, and then threatened the brother that if he ever put his finger on his son again, he'd kill him. And that kid was never touched again.
But the sick thing about that is, Peter, that the person committing the crime there was actually the father issuing the threat and not the man inflicting the beating.
Why do you say that?
No, it's just the topsy-turvy world that this country was back in the 50s. That the person doing the morally right thing was the person who was actually breaking the law of the land.
Yeah, but, what I'm saying is violence and the threat of violence was how the system worked. And if a teacher felt, certainly some of the brothers who were out of control, if they felt that the father was a really tough man, maybe a docker or something like that, and if they thought there was a possibility of him calling up to the school, they would back off. So they were very conscious of the kids they were picking on a lot of the time. They would pick on the most vulnerable kids. They would pick on kids, who the parents never showed in the school or were never around, or the kids were in a pretty vulnerable situation. That's how it worked. Not all the teachers were out of control, but some were. They weren't all Christian brothers. Some were. I mean, there was a practice in our school a lay teacher had that the slaps built up, and at the end of the day, a pupil would administer the slaps. Usually the biggest guy in the class. So a guy was made to slap his own friends. It was a common practice in our school.
It's the law of the jungle kind of stuff.
I mean, it was completely the law of the jungle. It was completely out of control. I saw a kid getting his head. He slipped. Teacher pushed him and he slipped and whacked his head off the radiator. And an ambulance came and took him away out of school. I mean, these occurrences weren't unusual. Violence was an everyday occurrence. And again, in my book, and in my stage show, which is now on in the Viking Theatre, I tell the story of violence around football, being told to go out and whack fellas. And, if you can't get the ball, you get the man. You get him with every part of your
this
body.
is what I was going to come on to now is, have we removed this from Irish society? Have we excised this particular cancer, or is it still there?
There's still things of it there, It's kind of, I've often said, and I love GAA, I love Dublin football, I love all of that. But there's an element in the GAA, and there's a strain in the GAA of it's about thumping people and hitting people, and the Association of Organised Milling, I once called it. It's defended. They tried to do this thing with this black card thing of cynical fouling, but cynical fouling is endemic in Gaelic football. And this idea of, thumping people off the ball when the referee is not watching and all of that kind of stuff, it has no place in sport. It has absolutely no place in sport. But it's kind of tolerated in Ireland. It's tolerated in Ireland because I don't know what it comes from, but some deep, bad, dark part of it. It's an expression.
Seamus, you're very, very clear in your own mind now about the wrong that was done to you and the effects that it had on you. When you look at at your peers and those who would have had the same kind of violence inflicted on them, do you see violent people among them? Do you see?
No, not at all.
Really?
No, because they don't want to hurt anybody the way they were hurt.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I know one particular guy. His mum and dad died quite young. And the teacher picked on him that much that he gained a speech impediment and he couldn't even say his name from fear. Now, he's through all that now and there's no issues with him, but he still, at the time, he used to tell me that he couldn't say his own name. He just couldn't from the fear because he thought he'd be getting it wrong. And if he got it wrong, he got a slap.
Larry, let me bring you back in there. Look, I know you don't agree with corporal punishment, and that was the point that you were making.
Certainly not. Certainly not.
But at the same time, we can't have, would you agree, any kind of ambiguous attitudes towards it either.
No. You see, Philip, let's see. I'm talking about late 50s, early 60s, right? When children were being flailed in schools, flailed by terrible bullies of teachers. And what I wanted to express on the programme was the warm feeling I had from the little school I went to, albeit
that you only got a smack on the hand. And
3 slaps about in 2 years, maybe, And, and it's fair to say that, and I've discussed this again with some of my classmates that I meet and that are still around, and we have nothing but good memories of that classroom. And I'm not in any way condoning, but take it in its time, Philip, if you can. And I did experience in secondary school, I did experience one and only one teacher who was an outright tyrant and bully.
I know, but do you really think that? Well, let me put the question to anybody else there, Peter or Seamus or Eamon. Do you?
And I've heard Peter's You see, like obviously Peter and the other guests you have on the program had terrible experiences.
But let me ask them, do you think that the time was any kind of a justification, that the context of the 50s or the 60s or the early 70s was a justification for any of this, or should these people not just have known right from wrong? Peter?
Well, I think fundamentally the system, particularly with the Christian Brothers, where a guy could go into the Christian Brothers seminary at 12, basically be taken from his family and put in a training college to become a Christian Brother at 12 years of age, and that very poor families and very needy families, particularly rural families, use this as a way of getting rid of kids, who were the financial burden on them.
And the same with the nuns as well, yeah.
Yeah, these kids were sent off then and became teachers. They were no way suitable to be teachers. They were rural guys, kids, basically, a lot of them in urban schools, trying to deal with very difficult educational situations and not equipped to do it. And their reaction and their way of doing it was to become bullies. That was the only way they could survive in the classroom, was to become tyrannical bullies. It instilled fear. And then, of course, once they started down that road, they found that worked for them to some extent, and there was no way back for them. They just became these, and some of them were incredibly out of control. I mean, I saw Christian Brothers, literally frothing at the mouth, slapping people in my day. But the thing is, they wouldn't take me on. I mean, I was a clever enough kid, so if you were smart enough and clever enough, and you had a good kind of family background, there's no way these guys would take you on.
Yeah,
they
all
took
right.
on the
I've got Seamus, hold on the line, stay with us if you wouldn't mind, please. But I got calls backing up and I got ad breaks backing up, so I've got to do this. Tommy, good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
When you were beaten by your teacher with a snooker cue, was it with the thin end or the thick end of it?
But he held the thick end in his hand and he'd beat you with the thin end of it.
And were these light smacks now, Tommy, or are we talking about...
No, the man went out to hurt you. He used a cane, and if he deemed that you deserved more, he'd use a snooker cue. And he wasn't afraid to use. No, he never hit you on the legs or hit you anywhere else. He'd on your hands. And I'm telling you, you get 5 or 6 snooker cue slaps on each hand. I mean, he drew blood to me. I was about 11 years old. And I took enough of it and I said, okay, I'm off. I walked out the door, he called me back, and I went home. And my mother was washing clothes out the back. I came in and out the back, and she had the bat on 2 chairs and she was washing the clothes, and I told her. And I always remember, she looked at my hands and she took a tea towel and she poured it into the water and she squeezed it. And she took me by the hand and brought me to school. And he came out. And when he came out the door of the classroom, she got between him and the door and she bet him up the hall to tea towel.
She bet him up?
She bet him up and down, yeah. And he started crying. And he was apologising. She said to him, if you think you're in trouble now, she said, wait till his father comes home, because my father was an Second World War veteran, and he'd take lightly to his children being beaten. But you see, a lot of the problem was you didn't tell your parents you were bet in school or slapped. And back then in the 60s, it wasn't slapped you were, it was beaten.
I know, but fair play to your mother. You must have loved her more than ever that day.
Oh, please. But you know the sad thing about it then, for 6 months after that, he just totally ignored me in school. And look what happened, that one day I came home and we were 12 and a half years old, and she said to me, you're not going to school anymore, I have a job for you. And the following Monday, at 12 and a half years old, I was working full time.
But it shouldn't have been that way, Tommy. You should have been able to finish your school days.
I loved school. I had brains to burden. Like 90% of the kids in my class. But you see, I was from, we say, like Corporation Estate, not too far from the school. I hadn't. You see, back then the teachers had their pets up the front. And when they came into school on a Monday, they had all their lessons done. They had 10 hour 10 for this and 10 hour 10 for writing and 10 hour 10 for sums. We were down the back and we were laughing and joking and having a crack. You know, but we weren't abusive as kids. Mm-hmm. But this one particular teacher, the man was just, he was an animal.
It sounds like an understatement. Did you get over it? Did you make your peace with what happened? Did your friends?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a strong individual. I mean, I was able to get on my life. I started working at 12 and a half years old. I haven't looked back. I've had my ups and downs like everybody else. But I have one friend who went to school with me. He's never married. He lives on his own. And if I met him twice a day, he'll talk about this teacher.
What,
And
now in
he's
2014?
Traumatised.
He'll still talk about it?
He'll still, every day, he'll talk about him. He'll mention his name. But the man was notorious. We know for a fact later on in years that he had been moved from my school to our school for brutality in the school he was in.
Yeah.
He was just absolutely appalling. And the poor man died in his 40s. You know, he died early enough.
Niall, good afternoon.
Hi, Philip, how are you?
You think we're engaging in teacher bashing?
I think there is an element of that. I'm a practicing teacher, and an awful lot of what's saying doesn't resonate with me at all.
Well, of course.
Back to 1971.
Yeah, but I'm in my late 40s as well, and I was in school in my 70s. I was in school in the 70s and the 80s, and I'm a teacher.
But did you ever get your head bounced off a blackboard?
I know.
Well, I did.
Yeah, well, I accept that. There are instances of this, but I think the bigger picture is that everyone is a child of their own time. And I remember when I was in teacher training 25 years ago, the professor, an eminent professor at the time, one of his first instructions to us, and I remember it well, was that as new teachers going into a classroom, make sure you don't smile before Christmas, because after Christmas you can be nice and you can be kind and you can come across as a human, but don't give an inch before Christmas.
But I don't understand what you mean when you say everyone is a child of their own time. Surely a child is a child and needs to be nurtured, cared for, loved for.
Yeah, that's unfortunate language, I suppose, given what we're talking about. We're creatures of our own time. We all grow up in a certain context. And in the 70s and the 80s, there was a very authoritarian kind of culture at the time where children should be seen and not heard. And the teachers were brought up and trained in that culture. And that's what they were expected to do. That's what the textbook said. Don't smile before Christmas. Now, some teachers then got carried away with that. Of course they did. And that gentleman who got his head bashed, of course there are stories like that. Of course there are. But the broad picture, I think, is that my memories of school were that in the 70s and the 80s, there were teachers who got carried away with the authoritarian scene. But there were an awful lot of the teachers were kind and nurturing, and even when that wasn't...
Of course there were not. Of course there were. But I mean, it's odd on your part, isn't it, to use the Nuremberg defence on behalf of those teachers of yesteryear. I'd say that was what they were brought up to do. Surely they had an innate ability to recognise right from wrong.
Well, it's degrees, isn't it? It's all taking things to degrees. At a certain time, corporal punishment was not deemed to be wrong. Now then, how far do you take corporal punishment? I don't know what the textbook said at the time. I'm sure bashing people's heads off a blackboard is extreme, and any sensible person will accept that. But at the time, corporal punishment was an accepted practice. It was an accepted practice, and that's unfortunate now, and it seems bizarre now, and it seems brutal now, based on where we're looking from at this point. But it was brutal then.
Seamus, go on, sorry.
It was brutal then, not just brutal now. And if anybody feels that they have the right to inflict hurt or pain on any child, whether it be a teacher or not, there is something physically, mentally wrong with them.
But
nobody would turn around and slap or hurt a child. You couldn't possibly.
It was accepted practice at the time, rightly or wrongly. I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying I'm just trying to recognise that it was accepted at the time.
Yeah, but what did someone say? Well, you can only hit them with a small slap, or no, you can't do it with a small one. No, you really have to hurt them.
Well, then
but Niall, the point that you came on to make is that you think that we're engaging in teacher bashing here. Can you, in all honesty, call the kind of person who would turn to physical force as an educational tool a teacher? We're not really teacher bashing. This is calling these people out for what they were, bullies and sadists.
But Philip, if you've been trained as a teacher, let's say in the 60s, you would have implemented what was seen as best practice at the time. And best practice at the time was the use of, at times, corporal punishment.
Yeah, but you've made the point yourself that there were plenty of teachers who didn't do that, who didn't use corporal punishment.
Sorry, that's not what I said. I said there were plenty of kind, nurturing teachers who I look back at fondly who did use corporal punishment from time to time because they deemed it necessary. Now, there were others who got carried away with it, and maybe they should have been weeded out. God knows if somebody is bashing children's heads off notice boards or whatever that gentleman said, you'd have to question that person's judgment and skills as a teacher. But there were perfectly good teachers that I recall very well, very good teachers, and they're still teaching, and they used selective corporal punishment from time to time because at the time it was deemed to be good practice. And in their professional judgment, that's what the children needed at the time, from time to time. And I think it's unfair now to demonise them as monsters or whatever. And there's all sorts of emotive language being used and pinned on these people. And I think that's unfair.
Well, what would you call them?
Go on. Tommy,
what would you call them?
Tommy here. Could I come in there for a moment, please? Just listen to your last speaker there. In fairness to the man, I think he's actually condoning the beating of children back in the 60s. No, it was okay to do it. That's the way. Oh, was not all right.
If somebody beat up your child, what would you call them?
Well, beating is an emotive word.
But if somebody slapped the head out of your kid coming up from school, an adult, what would you call them?
I've already said that.
But what would you call them? You get them arrested.
I wouldn't condone that.
Oh, God, I tell you.
In any way, shape or form, and I've said that. But I think using the same emotive language for all teachers in the past.
Nobody said it was all teachers. I said earlier on that there was a lovely, lovely man who taught us. He was a lovely man. National school, terrible.
Yeah, but there were plenty of lovely teachers who did selectively use some corporal punishment. And I don't think they should be demonised. I think they were using what was deemed to be best practice at the time. And we've all moved on from there, but it's wrong to demonise them.
If the Department of Education introduced a policy tomorrow that you felt was morally wrong, would you implement it because the Department of Education had told you to do so?
I think that's facile and it's a silly question.
No,
because we're coming from a place now where where the culture now is that corporal punishment is not accepted, okay? We're coming from that. Now, if you ask me to step back into it, then obviously I wouldn't. But if corporal punishment had been the accepted practice for centuries, and it was for centuries, and then teachers go into that profession, it's part of their culture, it's part of their DNA.
Are they taught in school how to hit people? It's a part of their curriculum. Oh, this is how you slap somebody on the hand. But it's better if you get them to bend down and stick their backside in the air.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt this for 1 second because I'm going to get a slap on the wrist here. If I don't, I have 2 ad breaks I have to take before the end of the programme. Let's get one more out of the way.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815. Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
Niall, in the school setting today, do you have enough disciplinary tools at your hands?
Yeah, well, there's a totally different approach today. It's not, like I said, it's not top-down, it's not authoritarian anymore. The philosophy now these days is that you're trying to bring the children with you. It's a whole team approach, and it's positive. Everything is positive and trying to work together and treat... it's more democratic. It's more democratic.
Does it work?
Children. Well, it does work. It depends on what you mean by work.
Can you create a learning atmosphere in the classroom with just this philosophy?
Of course you can. I think nobody learns through fear. Okay, nobody learns through fear. So if you have an authoritarian figure at the top, who's pronouncing the way it should be, and it's all top down, that's not real learning. Learning is bottom up, and it's collaborative, and it's working with the teacher and exploring all sorts of things. I'm not sure if that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but it's the only way. It's the only way, and it takes time for us to shift from one model to another. And I've experienced both. I went to school myself as a child when the model was authoritarian and it was all teacher-centred, but now it's child-centred, and it's a much better, more wholesome, more positive way of doing it. But I think you have to, just to go back to it, the teachers in the past, by and large, they were doing their best with the tools and the aids and the practices and the training that they had at the time. And I don't think that they should be all charged. Of course there were teachers who got carried away and who did certain things, and they probably came across as psychopaths or whatever. Of course they were, and whoever suffered who was the butt of that, of course they've got a grievance.
But is it good enough, Niall? Because this is the thing that I'm confused about what you're saying. Is it good enough to say that was the time, that those were the policies, that people can be given in a sense can be given a free pass because it was the 1950s? Nobody's
talking about free passes at all. I think it's not that's not helpful language. I mean, I don't know if you have children. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But whatever way you bring up your children now, you're a child of your time, of 2014, okay? So maybe if your child runs out on the road and you reprimand the child, you see that as best practice and the best thing to do. Now, who's to say that in 100 years' time, somebody doesn't pick over you and pick over the way you behave with your children and deem that to be inappropriate, and you're demonised.
Yeah.
You're just doing your best.
There is a difference. There is a difference between employing the best method to keep your child safe and doing something that you must have intuitively known to be morally wrong, to beat a child day after day after day for failing to learn.
Yeah, I've already said that to beat any child day after day is morally wrong, no matter who you are. But my point, again, to go back to it, is that there are plenty of teachers who selectively use corporal punishment as one of their teaching methods and one of their teaching tools for what they saw at the time for the benefit of the children. Not as some sort of a power trip or not out of sadism, but because they felt at the time, and they were trained, and it was part of their practice at the time, that this is the best way to get these kids through their leaving cert. All of it. And it is, in its own way, it's child-centred, even though now it seems very odd and unacceptable. At the time, it was child-centred.
My apologies for having done this. It's entirely my fault that I got so absorbed with the conversation earlier on in the programme that the latter half of it is stuffed with ad breaks, but I'm afraid I do have to take one more.
Joe Duffy! Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
Thank you, Niall. Thank you, Seamus. Thank you, Eamon, Peter, everybody who came in on that conversation.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
I can't even begin to count up the number of calls that we have had in relation to corporal punishment this week, and they just seem to keep on coming in. Anne, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Philip. Very well, thank you.
You saw people being punished when you were a pupil, and it ended up informing the kind of teacher you became.
Yes, I did. I saw humiliation, I saw physical, emotional, psychological abuse. I witnessed it and experienced the level of it.
And how did it inform you then when you went on to teacher training college? Because I assume that you did your training at a time when corporal punishment was still policy.
Well, Philip, I didn't train as a primary teacher. I worked in the secondary sector. Well, I knew, even as a 10-year-old, I knew there was something very wrong about it. And I saw the injustice of it. And I really phoned yesterday because I think we cannot be allowed to silence the witness, the testament of those men who were with you yesterday. It would be a double injustice.
And do you think there are those who would have them silenced?
Well, I felt that the last caller yesterday, a member of my own profession, was suggesting that this was an anti-teacher rant, or it was trying to stake out teachers in some kind of way. I don't accept that at all. These men were giving a true witness of what they experienced. And as a teacher, I wouldn't like to see it characterised as an anti-teacher campaign.
And when corporal punishment was outlawed, were you actually teaching in a secondary school at that stage, yeah?
Yes.
But I take it that it wasn't being used in that school?
No. I never was aware of it being used in the school. But
talk to me, were you aware more generally of the attitude of teachers towards this change of policy at that stage? Were there people saying, how on earth are we going to be expected to keep any kind of control in the classroom now?
I would have heard that, Philip, but it would have been from people who in some way had deficiencies about keeping students interested and stimulated. Most of the people that I worked with and socialised with in the profession wouldn't have been appalled. But I have to say that a number of years later, my two sons were in a school where it was still going on, despite the legislation. It was still going on. Now, they didn't seem to have encountered it that often, but they subsequently told stories, as boys tend not to tell you these things, but in later years they did recount incidents of brutality. And
you must have been horrified.
I was, but I did know that it depended often on the ethos of the school.
Indeed. John, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad.
John,
but I do not have, Philip, I do not have the confidence or the intelligence to articulate myself now as your previous caller there. She expressed things very well.
That's absolute nonsense, John. Have you just listened to what you've said to me there in the first 10 seconds of this call? You're expressing yourself perfectly. You wrote a letter to your teacher who punished you?
That was my way of coping with the feelings, the inner feelings and the inner hurt. I wrote a letter, but I did not mail the letter to the
And
individual.
did you write the letter while you were still in school being punished and this was going on, or was it many years later?
No, I only wrote the letter a few years back, just a few years back. And I'm in the, as the fellow would say, the winter of my life now, Philip.
And what did you say in the letter, John?
Well, it's a long enough letter, it would take about 4 minutes or whatever.
Please, we have the time.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I won't mention the clergyman's name, okay?
No, don't do that. But
no.
Read us the rest of it.
I will not mention the school. But it's, Dear Father X, during a recent visit to Cork, I met a schoolmate whom I had not seen for over 35 years. While standing on the steps outside the Imperial Hotel, we both looked back over our lives and sang praises of various classmates and teachers, some of whom we shall never again meet at a human level, as they are with their God. The reminiscing referred to school days in the vocational school, a 10-minute journey down memory lane. Positive feelings were very much experienced, and our parting shot was, we must get together again. Whilst driving home, the positive feelings were interrupted by negative ones when earlier school days returned once again to haunt me. Days in the secondary school, late 1950s. My most fear-ridden and humiliating experiences happened during that period. I have vivid memories of the teacher ordering me to stand up and recite a verse of Unspalpin Fánach. I obeyed, but after the first 2 lines, maybe I hadn't even arrived in Cashel, the teacher, equipped with leather strap, stood over me and yelled, "Amach os ord." I felt he was going to make an example of me. I was 12 years. All eyes were on me, and I wanted to scream, cry, or die. However, I started again. Good Joe Arish. Amach os ord interrupted my feeble efforts. He had me, and he knew it. I lived at home with my father, who was smitten with illness for many years, and whom I had to care for whilst my mother worked outside the home each evening and some afternoons. I also endured other terrible hardships, unspeakable at that time, which I do not wish to commit to paper. Amach os ord, the teacher shouted, whilst the leather strap made contact on the back of my neck. The teacher, who had been standing beside me, marched to the front of the classroom, leaving me with feelings of terrible fear and physical hurt. In actual fact, I learned the poem under extremely difficult circumstances, as I did not understand what I was learning. And when ordered to recite same, I had no idea of what Amach os ord meant. Circumstances did not allow me to share my school problems with the folks at home. I have memories of being labelled a failure when the same teacher wrote to my mother, Oscailga, suggesting that I should not remain in the secondary school. Thus, I was enrolled in the vocational school. Unfortunately, I did not learn anything about love from my secondary school days. Fear and failure, yes. I do not wish to indulge in self-pity, but I feel that as an adult, the teacher should have tried to understand and encourage and make it his business to find out why this 12-year-old offspring of intelligent parents failed to reach his true potential in the classroom. Father, I confess you were one of the few people I hated when I was a vulnerable child. Painfully, I can remember times when my anger and hatred nearly consumed me. The feelings of hatred which I have carried and entertained into adulthood leave me with a sense of guilt, especially when trying to recite the Lord's Prayer with meaning. Please, try to understand how difficult it is for me to communicate the above. I fully appreciate that it may be difficult for you too to read and digest. Hopefully, by sharing the above, it may be possible to develop positive feelings towards you. Perhaps we were both victims of that particular era. I'm sure you have blossomed well in your priestly duties. In an extraordinary way, you have taught me the power of forgiveness. May the good Lord always keep you in the palm of his hand. Slán agus benacht. That's it, Philip.
Why did you never send it?
I beg your pardon?
Why did you never send it?
I had a reason that I did not send it. I feared that the man could get a heart attack when he'd read it, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for killing him or being responsible for hurting another individual as I have been hurt myself.
It's awful. I mean, like you say, you learned forgiveness, but you also learned fear and failure at this man's hands. Which is the more abiding now?
Well, now, 'tis I have, yes, I better not go into how I'm feeling just now, but that was my way of dealing with the situation. You know, I have, and I am not alone in my loneliness, and I'm sure we've heard that expression before. But it was a wicked way to treat children, and I can empathize fully with the people who telephoned your line yesterday. So that's all I have to offer, Philip. I have no experience, and this is my first time ever speaking on the airwaves.
Well, it was very eloquently done as well, and I hope that sharing it has in some way been a therapeutic exercise for you too, John, given that you never got to share it with the person who was tormenting you. And you know what? You're not alone. Michael, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Does what you're hearing John read there resonate with you too?
It certainly does, and it resonates with me in a special way because I wrote a book in 2007 called Why I Called My Sister Harry. I got a severe beating from a nun at the age of 4, and it had such an emotional impact on me that I didn't speak for 3 months, and when I started to speak again, I had a severe stutter or stammer, which is very common in Ireland. And when I done the research for the book, I spoke to over 600 people trying to find out what was the trigger for their own stammering or their own challenge with stammering. And I found out that over 80% would have had similar experiences, had a similar age group of being in the education system from, we'll say, 1955 through to 1970.
80% of 600 people?
80% of 600 people who are challenged by stammering now.
Now, they weren't necessarily saying that it was the Christian Brothers or the nuns what caused my stammering, but that it contributed, it didn't help.
It contributed. That's because they were challenged by stammering, they were picked on in school, they were bullied, all of that, they were skipped over, it had a grave impact on them, because remember that the art of stammering is covering up and holding back. And in my own instance, when I got beaten by a nun, it was compounded 3 years later when I changed school, that one day the teacher that I had was out sick and I ended up in the principal's class, and he asked me a question, and it was a damp, miserable. I remember it so clearly It was a damp, miserable day in November. He had an old school, high windows, limestone walls, and he asked me a question and I couldn't answer it. And he shouted at me to spit it out, and if my life depended on it, I couldn't spit it out. And he lost his temper, and his way of punishment was he used to have a 1 metre stick with a brass ferrule on the end of it, and if he really wanted to punish you, he turned the stick on its edge and he hit me across the fleshy part of my palm, and he drew blood. And of course, in 1962, that was very, very common in the school that I went to. Now, I'm not saying that every teacher in that school was the same, but this man, he got pleasure out of it every day.
Do you recognise people now who have been through the same experience as you, who have suffered in the same way, without them necessarily having to tell you their story?
Of course I do, because I work very closely with the stammering community in Ireland. And not only that, I heard your interviews yesterday, and I heard people saying about going to the toilet and the beds in their pants in school and all of that. Like, I experienced all that, and I experienced it through one word, and that was terror. I was terrified.
The reason I ask it is that because I was, on Saturday last, I was at a screening of a film about Christina Noble and her family, and how her family were pulled apart by the church and by the state, and the consequences of being separated in their early childhood and taken away from each other, and the lasting impact that has had on them for 50 years. And as I was standing there after the film, having a chat with her brother, Sean, lovely man, this other gentleman came up to us, very well dressed, very well spoken, outwardly nothing exceptional about him whatsoever. And Sean turned to him straight away and said, "I can see you, just by the look of you, have the same kind of story to tell as I do." And the hairs stood up on the back of my neck, because to me he looked no different to any other member of the population. But Sean identified him straight away as somebody who had been abused, humiliated, traduced, betrayed by the church and by the state, just by the way he caught his eye and by the way he looked at him.
Yeah. But what we have to realise is the impact that had throughout the person's life. Like the 600 people that I interviewed, the impact that the challenge of stammering, their experience in school, that had on them throughout their life was enormous. Now, as I said, I'm not saying that everybody in my school, every teacher in my school, I had some excellent teachers, but those two people were principals. Those were the ones that should have led by example, and they were never pulled up. And that man, he was only found out because of something else that I don't want to go into now, but in fairness to the parish priest of that time, he was the one who brought him to answer the questions. But all that I'm saying is that people that I know throughout Ireland who are challenged by stammering would have very, very bad experiences of both primary and secondary school. And the challenge of stammering is bad enough without going through that.
Indeed, and everything else. And as you say there were priests who were good, there were nuns who were good. And Barry, good afternoon, how are you?
Good afternoon, Philip. How are you?
In your experience, it was the lay teachers who were the worst, not the brothers.
Well, that's true. When I was in primary school, the brothers used to give you your smack, and your teacher got your smack, and it was nothing that the kids, it was normal for it. But when I went into secondary school, when I was about 12 years of age, just 11 turning 12, I went into first year, and lay teacher there used to teach English and Latin, and he was very upmarket, and I came from a fairly humble background, and he said he was going down the classroom asking the names of the pupils, and of course there was a great O'Connor clan and all this, and my surname came up, and he said, "Oh, the only man I know of your name," he said, "was a murderer."
He didn't.
He did, yeah, a murderer.
On your first day in a new school?
On my first day in a new school, and at that time there was about 40 students in the class, and of course, being kids, it was funny for a little while, you know what I'm saying? And I was very upset over it.
Of course, but you were singled out, you were marked out from the moment you were in there.
Yeah. And then as the year went on, I found he had a personal dislike to me. And anything he'd be saying to me, like he'd bring up, like that I feel very sorry for John there. When John was brought up to the top of the class to read your poetry, and he'd sit on a chair, he'd have a ruler, and if you stumbled at all saying your poetry, he'd slap you in the back of the legs. But eventually, anyway, I'll cut a long story short, I was so terrified of this man. I was afraid of my life of him. And I started to mitch from school.
Of course you
So,
did.
of course, mitching from school, the school at the time, it was a very good school, and they informed my parents to send out a letter, your child is not at school. My mum said to me, how's things at school today? I said, fine. So I got up the following morning. We used to go to school on Saturday morning, and I was avoiding school, and my mother came behind me. She said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to message for the teacher. So she said, well, I'm going to message for the teacher as well. So she brought me into Kevin Street Garda Station and said, this boy won't go to school, he's mitching. So, just to frighten me because she didn't know the circumstances. So the guard came out and he said, well, I want to know why this boy is not going to school. So I explained, I broke down, and I told him that I was terrified of this teacher. So my mother said, he'll go to
There's
school.
an enlightened guard now. Didn't he do you a favour?
Oh, fantastic. There was two of them, actually. So eventually, anyway, my mother said, he'll go to school on Monday. No, he won't. He'll go to school today. So the two guards put me in the guard's car, drove me to the school with my mother, and demanded to see this teacher.
Good
and
Lord.
he confronted him and told him that he should be educating me, not terrorising me. And
What year was this, Barry?
This would have been about 1957. I'm 70 now. And
that was very much the exception to the rule of the behaviour of anybody in an authority position.
Yeah. Well, this man, he was well known. We're not going to names, but I'm sure if there's anybody in my class, my classmates were absolutely wonderful. They were the guys in the class were brilliant, every single one of them. But however, he was confronted anyway, and I went in on the Monday, and for 3 years I was ignored by the lay teachers.
Uh-huh.
The brothers gave me my education. There was actually one lay teacher that he was an elderly man, and he was very, very considerate. But all the teachers, they never bothered correcting my homework. I was just totally, just put on the outside. And it was actually the Christian Brothers. I played football and hurling, and that sort of went down well at that time with the Christian Brothers. So that they actually got me through my education.
But still, isn't it awful that the best that you could hope for was to be neglected by your teacher and overlooked and ignored?
Oh yeah. Well, that's actually, as I say, and the brothers were most kind because they obviously knew. But this was a gang up. There was about 5 lay teachers in the secondary school at the time, and none of them just weren't interested in me, But that man actually, and looking back, listening to the things yesterday, that's what brought me on the phone today. Like, in this day and age, with kids being bullied and everything else, I've stood out in the rain and fields, and I hid because you couldn't be seen walking around with a school bag. I used to hide in places that you wouldn't go to, any laneways and everything, and it'd be lashing rain and everything. You'd be hiding till it was 4 o'clock. I was a child. I didn't know what to do. There were some kids that were more intelligent, probably said, listen, we go to the pictures or something like that. But I hadn't got that money or anything like that. But I was terrified of this man. He really terrified me. And but my mother did the right thing, thinking that she was correcting me, but she actually, at the end of the day, she corrected the teacher.
And those two guards as well. All right, Barry.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
Thank you very much for your call. Take care of yourself.
Okay, thanks very much, Philip.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
It doesn't happen to everybody, but there are very many who are fortunate enough to have encountered that one teacher who inspires you. And Margaret, in your case, it was a nun.
Yes, Philip, how are you? I started school actually in Sligo with the Mercy Sisters in 1962. And it wasn't until probably 1968 until I encountered this Sister Madeleine. And I often wondered about her, where she is now, and I would love to meet her and thank her. I don't know if that was her real name, I'm sure she had another name. But after years of being very fearful going to school and being very timid and just frightened, really, of the sisters who taught me before that, particularly in junior infants. It was called low babies back then. And
what a term! But sorry, was it just that she was good compared to the other sisters, or that she was an exceptional person?
No, she was particularly good. You know, I'm not saying I don't want to badmouth any of the sisters who taught at that time. You know, they were very dedicated sisters, very dedicated nuns. But the one, you know, I did have in the early school life was, you know, to say the least, a bit of a tyrant. I think she would have been better off maybe running the country rather than teaching baby infants, you know.
Or maybe not. But why? What did she put you through?
Well, I was a left-hander, and I can remember being up at the blackboard, and I was very tiny back then. I still am very small, and I was, you know...
You were forced to conform and use your right hand, were you?
Well, eventually I had to be switched over to right-handed writing because I just couldn't... For anybody who's left-handed, they would understand this, you know. The teacher shows you how to make a number 2 and goes out to the right with the right hand. So this is how we make a number 2. So being a little kid of 5, I went out with my left hand, which meant I did a perfect mirror image of a number 2.
Back to front, absolutely, yeah.
So I couldn't grasp that I had to go against that, you know. So I was murdered, really, for just not getting that.
And sorry, and you were made to write with your right hand. Do you write with your right or your left now?
I write with my right hand now. But really? I don't write very well with my right hand.
Okay, anyway, back to Sister Madeleine. What stood out about her?
Sister Madeleine was first of all, she was a beautiful looking woman. She was probably only in her 20s at that time, but it was difficult to tell what age she was. She just nurtured every single child in the class. I think it was 5th class, actually. And she nurtured music and drama and all the arts, and she was just very understanding and very, just almost like a mother, really, to all of the children, you know.
And pointedly very different to the other nuns that were there, yeah?
Yes, I think so, yeah. She just seemed to, she got a lot more out of the children by being, you know, firm but very fair in her dealings with everybody. And I can remember her making a set for a play we did, Tierna Nog. She made the whole set for that play and brought it to the All-Ireland. We were All-Ireland winners, actually, that year. And it's just, yeah, I have a lot of really, really good memories of her. And I think my education really started at that point.
It's interesting, though, because it's a question that came up yesterday. It's a question I can see coming up with other callers who want to get in here is, were there not teachers at that time who allowed themselves to be guided by their moral compass and not what the policy said that they should be doing and hitting children and educating them through negative reinforcement and not copying what every other teacher did? Obviously, Sister Madeleine, in your case, was one of those people who said, no, there is another way.
And I've often wondered, did she remain as a mercy nun, you know? Because her treatment and her culture of teaching was so different from what went earlier. Now, I mean, from baby infants up to 5th class, I must have had some nuns who were okay, you know, because I don't remember them as being particularly bad. But
when you were in low babies, as you said, it wasn't the best of times. Let me bring in Geraldine here. Geraldine, because on that question of the moral compass, you had a teacher who was awful to you, but then obviously had misgivings about what they had done later on.
Yes, I had a terrible time once. I've just been constantly remember being hit with 2 rulers put together and being hit on the knuckles. And then one particular day, this teacher just was exasperated probably with me, I don't know, but she hit me across the face. And it was just pretty horrendous. And I spoke to my parents about it, and a friend of theirs spoke to the school about it. And the following day, the headmaster came in with a policeman dressed in uniform and said, "Stand up here, anybody who saw this girl being slapped across the face."
Sorry, the police, the Gardaí said that?
Yes, the headmaster said it. with the policeman. The policeman came in with him, with the headmaster. The headmaster said, "Stand up here, anybody who saw Geraldine being hit across the face." Well, of course, nobody stood up.
Of course not.
Absolutely. Everybody was absolutely terrified. I can still remember to this day being brought out through a kind of a courtyard type into another part of the school, and then being brought up into this bathroom. And my God, when I think of it now, this policeman and the headmaster, and the headmaster kept saying, "You'll have to stop lying. You've just got to stop lying about this." And I said, "Well, I know I was definitely slapped across the face." And he said, "Well, show me how you were slapped." Well, can you imagine? I was just standing there. I was absolutely terrified. I said, "What do you mean, show you?" So I put my hand up, literally up to his face, and he said, "Don't be ridiculous. That's not a slap across the face."
Oh, that's just stupid.
So,
and the guard never made any effort to talk to you, not in the company of a teacher or the headmaster?
No, not at all. I was constantly with the two of them.
Oh, for God's sake.
I'm actually shaking now as I'm telling you. It was really, really a horrible, horrible feeling. But going back to the classroom and everybody looking at me and sort of, I knew, and I said to my best friend at the time, I remember her, I can't remember her surname, but I remember her name was Susan, and I said, "My goodness, why didn't she?" Said she was just terrified. But
idiotic teaching and idiotic policing as well. Complete contrast to the other story that we just heard a few minutes ago about the two teachers or the two policemen who went and tackled the abusive teacher. But tell me, what was it then that suggested to you that your teacher had a bit of a change of heart about what he had done?
Well, I was outside, and I was outside playing camogie in the field one evening, and the teacher came out and said, I couldn't believe it. They were coming up in the field, and I thought, my God, I'm going to be hit again now, and for doing something wrong. This is what affected me all my life. I kept thinking, my God, I'm doing something wrong here, And they just came up and said, "Really very sorry, Geraldine, I made a terrible mistake. I've done you a dreadful disservice, and I hope everything will go well for you." And I just thought, wow. Now, I just thought that was an amazing thing for them to do. Looking back on it now, I thought it was absolutely amazing thing for them to do. It took great courage for them to do that.
Well, it did. It just goes to show you, I suppose, good people can do bad things. Bad people can occasionally do good things.
Yeah, but I just think what happened in those days was absolutely horrendous, and I think people should talk about it because I think it gets a bit off your chest. It is
Margaret,
very, very
Margaret, you wanted to come back in there, Margaret?
Yes, I just feel, anyone who has an inclination towards teaching, I think, they should really think about whether they like children first and foremost, and because a teacher next to the parents will have a huge influence on a child, and a good teacher can change a child's life, can change an outcome for an adult, actually. And I think, a good teacher will never be forgotten by a pupil.
And neither, from everything that we've heard in the last couple of days, will a bad or an abusive or an evil teacher
that's exactly
either.
it. Yeah, the opposite is true also.
Okay, ladies, Margaret, Geraldine, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have to do this. Charlie, much the same as a number of other people who've called today, you developed a stammer as a result of your time with the Christian Brothers.
Oh, I did, Philip, here in Cork. I did indeed. I got an almighty stammer. I couldn't go into a shop for my mother for a pint of milk or a loaf of bread in the local shop. I couldn't. I used to serve Mass in a local convent. And the nuns had to take over answering the priest. I couldn't put two words in front of myself. I just could not talk.
And there had been no hint of a stammer before you went to school?
No.
Before
Never.
They got their hands on
and
you,
I went to school, and this particular brother used to make me recite the glorious mysteries. And like when you start off the glorious mysteries, you say the Annunciation, and then it changes to the Visitation. You understand what I'm saying? It was the and the. And he used to roar around the classroom with his stick, make me say it again and again and again. And of course, the more he roared and the more he became sadistic, the worse I got.
How come you can call Liveline and speak to an audience of hundreds of thousands today without even the slightest hint of a stammer?
I can stand up, and I'm pretty well known in this area. And I can stand up and have stood up in front of 700 and 800 people and given presentations, both slides and audio, and without as much as a single stammer. The stammer left me the minute I came out of school.
What?
The minute I left school. The stammer left. And of course, one of the problems with this particular brother was that I was not sport orientated. And with the Christian brothers, if you were into sport, you were the bee's knees. But if you weren't interested in GAA, my God, they had no time for you.
But are you telling me the day after you left school, that was it? You were speaking without a stammer?
I never stammered a day since.
Charlie, that just tells its own tale, doesn't it? Thank you very much for your call.
Philip.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much to everybody else today, Geraldine and Margaret and so on. Today's programme was produced by Emma Laffin. Research was by Alistair MacDonald. Back again tomorrow. Dermot, hello, good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
You know how they say that smell has this power to transport you back in time and make you feel right now exactly as you felt back then. For you, it's a particular sound, I gather.
Well, not so much that, as that on many occasions, I was listening to your programme yesterday, and I think you've done a great service by bringing up the topic, because there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people throughout Ireland that has a residue of fear still within them, an emotional fear, and the memory of physical abuse that happened to him in school. But hearing that man who wrote the letter, on many occasions I was tempted to write to Joe about the topic myself. Not that I went through an awful, which I did go through it, and it has left a residual effect on me. But I met a school friend of mine a couple of months ago in a supermarket here in Waterford, and we were talking about school days, and I told him, and I was laughing about how I left school. I left through the window. I jumped out the window and I ran off, and I went on the duck for 3 weeks, and I was caught eventually. But I went to the tech, but I just couldn't take any more physical abuse. I was petrified and terrified. And but this man that I was talking to, he said, you were lucky, he said, that your mother left you to school. My mother and father wanted me to get a good education. And with that, he began to shake. And it was like as if somebody had plugged him into the electricity. And he was shaking there, and I got quite a shock. And for weeks after, and to the present day, I still think about him, like the terror that he went. He was a timid young fellow. I remember him very well.
And he started reliving this however many years on, 30, 40 years on, right in front of you.
I mean, I'm 40. I mean, I'm 67 now. He would be the same, you know. We would have left school in 62, 63. But, you know, he was there, and he was lamenting the fact that he had to stay in school and had to put up with that abuse. And in his case, it would be more emotional abuse than physical abuse. In my case, there was a lot of physical abuse. But, you know, I was eventually... Tell
me about the keys.
Well, it was the superior of the school used to teach us geometry in the mornings, and I was sure of one thing, and that was, like, if you can visualise the old jail gates or the gates of an old... these were very big, large iron gates that they had on the school, and the superior would open the gates every morning, but large keys, probably maybe 6 inches long, a bunch of those. And, I mean, I was hopeless in school, to be quite honest, absolutely hopeless, because I didn't understand Irish. So I was petrified of making a mistake, because if I made a mistake, I got a beating. And he'd bring me up every morning, and I mean every morning, and he'd throw a rectangle or whatever, or a pyramid or whatever on it, and he'd say, you know, ag mínigeishin, he'd say in Irish, because everything was through Irish except English, and I just didn't understand Irish, so that was the problem. And I would be just fumbling about trying to explain this and whatever you say, and I just wait for the rattle of the keys, and then you could hear the swish and bang right across the ear.
With heavy metal keys across the ear.
Yeah, but that's why I just jumped out the window and ran. I went to my grandfather's, and I stayed in my grandfather's. I used to go to school every morning. But, I mean, when I think back about it now, I used to wait for my mother to have bacon and cabbage for the dinner, and I'd save some of the bacon and cabbage, and I'd go out in the yard the following morning, because our toilet was an outside toilet. We didn't have a sink in the house, so it was just a shower, and the tap was outside, and I'd feign that I was getting sick, vomiting, and I'd be shouting, "Mammy, Mammy, I'm getting sick." Of course, she was much wiser than I was. She'd come out and she'd see the bit of cabbage on the ground and the bit of ribs or whatever, and slap across the head. But another important point is that, you see, when you got a beating in school, you couldn't go home to your mother and be comforted by her or your father, because they say, well, you must have done something. Such was their difference to the religious orders, you know, and to the teachers in general in school. So you didn't have any comfort from any place.
Now, I'm not saying that my mother and father didn't care. They cared very much. But that was as it was at the time. You could hear the emotion. That man who wrote the letter, which he never sent, that's what brought it all back to me. And that woman, you know. I mean, I met a friend of mine who I'll go walking with every day with our dogs. And he went came to a religious order school. And his father died when he was a baby. So his mother reared 5 or 6 kids. And he was a brilliant hurler. But when it came to the photograph, he didn't have any kit. He didn't have the shoes. He didn't have the jersey. And they excluded him from the photograph. And no later than the other day, that man was standing with me crying up on the green here. You know?
Over the memory of that.
And he's 78. So this is the type of residue, this emotional residue that has to be gotten. It has to be exercised. And it's only your program over yesterday and today and whenever long you want to
what stays with you, John? I mean, what is still there hanging around in the back of your head?
Look, it's I don't know. You see, let me put it this way. I still find confrontation extremely difficult. I'm incapable of it. I'll walk away an argument. I mean, I've left lots of things because people were argumentative, people were confrontational. And I find that has been my problem, because in school you couldn't be confrontational, you know, because when one particular question that I asked of a teacher, he walked down towards me, and as he was walking towards me, he was shouting the prayer, because everything was in Irish. Your mother must be so proud to have reared such a great scholar. Aren't we such a brilliant scholar? And he walked towards me, and he jumped on me and began to beat me, and banged my head off the desk. And my friend in school, he jumped up and said, "Brother, leave him alone." But it's like the poor man himself. I inquired about several of the brothers that taught me and were very abusive towards me in school. And one of them in particular was not so much towards me, but to a lot of other pupils. And like the brother told me that he's now retired and he should have never been a brother. Mm-hmm. Another brother then went off to be a priest, and I believe he's very remorseful. I don't know whether he's still alive now at this stage, but he was very remorseful about the way he treated his pupils. And this other brother, I had a cut in my hand which was cut into the bone from glass, and something we did in the playground, myself and a friend, we were getting 12 slaps off of a lever on the hand, and I asked him could he give me the 12 slaps on the one hand. I showed him the cut on my finger and said, if you hit me on that, it'll be very sore, sir. And he said that the general idea of the prayer, he said, is to hurt you, and gave me the 12 on the finger and opened up the cut again.
Hang on the line there for a second. John, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just like Dermot there, why did you never tell your parents that you were being beaten?
Well, I suppose at the time it was taken that, you know, it was your fault and not anything else. And essentially you wouldn't tell your parents that, you know, you were not performing in class. And on that basis, it just wasn't mentioned. Now, my problem was basically I was dealing with a teacher that was quite psychologically abusive, as far as I'm concerned, in that he would pick on weaker students in certain subjects and kind of highlight the fact that someone who couldn't read or somebody who wasn't good at maths, he would throw obviously difficult questions towards them, and if you didn't answer them or you didn't get them right, you got essentially, now the letter is a polite word. I wouldn't describe it as a letter. I would describe it as a whipping nearly, because this thing would be flung in the air before it would reach your hand, to the point that when you hit you, it was at full force.
And just out of interest, John, did he ever use encouragement with the better students, with the ones who could answer the question? Or did anybody ever get a Mohan Vukal out of this man?
Not in the slightest, no.
Right. So encouragement just wasn't part of his vocabulary or part of his method of teaching.
And the other point, which I kind of think is important, is that when you're in a situation like a classroom where a teacher is picking on, well, like, I didn't feel I was a weaker student. I was probably one of the quieter ones. But when other people in the class, other pupils see you being bullied by the teacher, you're fodder for then the next line of bullying from them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was
because they're taking their cues from the adults, they're taking their cues from the role model in the classroom. Why wouldn't they do exactly the same thing?
But what I find extraordinary is that how this particular teacher didn't realise that he was going into, well, he obviously did realise, but he was going into class every day, essentially picking on the same people. And I just feel that, it's an extraordinary situation to think about.
And how long did this go on? Was this your entire national school time?
No, it was about 2 years just before going into secondary school. But, they're very formative years.
Yeah.
So, when you're dealing with this on an ongoing basis, it was very difficult. Even thinking that now, I can actually still kind of get that sensation of, uneasiness about it.
It doesn't go away. It still stays with you.
Yeah.
And that's, the one thing that has come through loud and clear this week is that this is not something that you just get to sweep away under the emotional carpet. It has real and lasting, permanent effects, and it has scarred people's lives. Josephine, good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. How are you?
You were punished on a daily basis for, wait for it, being left-handed.
That's right, yeah.
For God's sakes, what age were you?
Between the ages of 4 and 9.
4 and 9. 5 years of being punished.
Yeah, and they used to say that the devil was in me, and that I'd never be any good, and this was the nuns now.
And did you ever tell anybody, Josephine?
Well, I didn't tell anyone because I thought that I was wrong, and one thing and another, you get to feeling that they're telling the truth, that you are no good. But one time I had a twin sister, and the nun caught me writing with my left hand and chopped my little finger with the ruler, which I got cut badly, and that's when everything came out at home.
And your twin sister wrote with her right hand, did she?
Yes, she was right,
That's interesting. And so when it came out at home then, what did your parents do?
Well, actually, at first I was afraid in case that I did do something wrong. But my mother was up at school, and I think she went to a solicitor about it and one thing and another. And after that, then I was just left at the back of the class, and I wasn't taught at all.
Well, I suppose it's better than being picked on and bullied and beaten, but for God's sake, that's no response at all. And were you ever assessed educationally,
No, I was actually brought to a psychologist then by my mother. And they threw balls and had me play tennis and stuff like that. And they said she is definitely left-handed and she was to be left alone.
And you write with your left hand and do everything with your left hand to this day, do you?
Yes, I do.
And difficult question now that you've reached adulthood, I suppose, but do you ever feel the lack, or do you ever feel that there was any impact spending so many years? 5 years?
There's impact every day.
Go on.
It's, you wouldn't be as confident as you should be, and you'll always step back and you'll always stay in the shadows, and you wouldn't like yourself to be up in the limelight in any sort of way.
And are you very different from your twin in that respect?
Totally.
She's a much more confident, outgoing kind of person, is she?
Yes, she would be. I'd be a very anxious person.
God, that just must go to highlight the differences in what you went through all the more, make it all the more painful that you can see the kind of person that you might have been.
Yes. And even after it was all done and over with, I remember my mother sending me out the front door to school, and when she came out with the ashes of the fire, I'd be sitting on the step at the back door, didn't want to go at all.
And did you finish school? Did you get a leaving cert?
No, I ran out the door at 15.
Really?
Yeah.
And what did you do afterwards?
I worked in a shop in the town where I'm from, and then I went to England, and I done caring on night duty for 24 years.
Caring. Would you like to have been? Would you like to have been a nurse if you had done your leaving cert?
Possibly. There could have been a great chance of that, yeah.
But that just wasn't to be, was it?
No, wasn't to be.
Right, okay. Josephine, thank you very much for your call.
You're very welcome.
Kevin, good afternoon. How are you?
Hello, Philip. Lovely to talk to you. Philip, could I just say something before I start? I think it's very ironic that Josephine spoke about a left-handed twin. That I had a brother, Dermot Heffernan, and he's 3 years dead today. But he was a Catholic, and he had a sign pinned to his back at primary school which read, "Kick me hard," placed on him by a teacher in that school.
Oh, for God's sakes. By a teacher?
Absolutely. Now, in all fairness, a new principal in the school, a more enlightened principal called Gus McCarthy, removed it when he found out it was there.
You wouldn't have to be enlightened. You just have to be a human being.
Well,
frankly.
in those days, he was enlightened.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, you know.
And it was down to the left-handedness.
Yeah,
there was nothing else that singled this child out.
Absolutely. He was considered to have a devil in him.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? I mean, the whole evolving of the word, because what is it again? The Latin for left is sinistra, and that became in English sinister, and it had always got religious associations with it, whereas right was dexter, which became dexterous and dexterity, and came to be seen to be a good thing. And there was always just this religiously motivated suggestion that left-handedness was to be in league with the devil.
Yeah, well, it's all based, I suppose, on the human propensity to look for supernatural explanations for what they didn't understand, you know, and unfortunately some of those explanations ended up in severe misery for some people.
You had your own experiences of being beaten and bullied, though.
Well, I did, you know, and it's not necessarily what I contacted you to talk about, because I really am, and I'd like to preface this by saying that I am not anti-Catholic, or I'm not teacher bashing, because I have met some lovely and wonderful teachers in my life, but what I despise are the consequences of ill-found logic. And I think that's it still prevails in our culture today. You know, and I gave a lot of thought to why this abuse occurred.
And where do you see this still existing, this kind of illogical thought?
Well, for example, I reason that... Can I relate back to a question you asked, Philip?
Yeah.
And you asked why. And that's an excellent and a poignant question. Why did this abuse exist? And I know one contributor to your program suggested that it existed because it was the culture at the time. And that really is circular logic. It's as good as saying, let's not attempt to answer it. It existed because it existed. And I feel that there are real reasons behind it. And one of the first was the Catholic ethos. And that's give me the boy at 7 and I show you the man. Now this really speaks for itself because it supports abuse and it promotes it.
Do you know something though, Kevin? I mean, it also promotes good teaching practice. You know that famous line from the Brian Moore novel, give me a young girl in the prime of her life and she is mine forever, that they can positively shape and influence somebody as well. But I see what you're saying, that it can...
Well, no, they can for good. But what you cannot do is you cannot tell people and coerce people into what to think. You must encourage them on how to think in a loving, caring, emotional environment. And there's a lot of science behind that point of view, because emotion and learning are intricately intertwined. Intricately. But what I would say, Philip,
when you say that, sorry, can we just explore that for a second? Do you mean that somebody who is in a state of fear, somebody who has elevated levels of cortisol coursing through their veins, is not going to be in a place where they can learn?
Yeah, well, where they cannot have a positive learning experience. Let's say they can learn, but they cannot learn in a deep and meaningful way. They can rote learn, like a rat can learn the way to find the food at the end of a maze by being punished when he goes in the wrong direction.
Yes.
But that's rote learning. It's not really meaningful learning. You know, if you think of a child exits the womb, into an out-of-focus world. It searches, it looks to try and make sense and meaning of its world in a warm and encouraging environment using all its senses. You take that child to 7, hand it over to the Jesuits, who will give you the man, and they put down a roadblock and say, no, you're not going to explore. You're not going to discuss. You're not going to engage. I'm going to teach you what to think, and I'm going to show you your place in the world and your potential. And that is the danger of that.
They do fix a march or a boundary to a child's march, no doubt, but a child has to learn boundaries at the same time. You have to learn how to get on with others, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. They have to learn what is and isn't acceptable behaviour. They also have to be taught how to think and how to learn. Now, I accept what you're saying about not what to think, but these are all valuable parts of educating a child, aren't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the environment in which they are done is very, very important. And the environment in which they're achieved. And really and truly, this conversation is about the environment. And, my proposition is that a negative learning environment, an environment where, for example, people like John and Josephine have the experiences they have, don't promote deep learning or deep and meaningful learning.
No, of course they don't. They just promote a desire to get out of school as quickly as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Come here, even in spite of your experiences, you've obviously done an awful lot of reading around education or gone on with further education yourself, Kevin.
Well, I have, yeah. I have.
To what level?
To what level? Well, I've done a PhD in learning.
A PhD in learning?
Yeah. Well, more precisely in learning technologies.
Okay. We really are in the presence of somebody who knows what they're talking about then.
Well, I mean, the real point that I want to make is, Philip, that basically the 3 points. Firstly, that this abuse stems from that ethos. Give me the boy at 7
and I will show you the
man.
Yeah.
That's number 1. And number 2 is that the abuse was selective. We know the abuse was selective, and it was perpetrated on the lower spectrums of society.
On whoever the teacher had a prejudice towards themselves, and it was usually a personal prejudice, which is why we hear about the poorer kids in class getting picked on all the time.
Absolutely.
Or those who are in any way different, be it left-handed or dyslexia or whatever.
Absolutely. And whose parents didn't have the means to contribute, perhaps, to the school coffers.
And the third point?
And the third point is that the abuse was conducted with those with the intelligence to teach subjects such as physics and maths. Now, these require the capability of logical thinking.
Yes.
You see, so it's not done in ignorance.
No.
So, based on those...
If you can figure out a maths theorem, you can figure out that beating a child for 5 years and not getting them to learn means that beating is not a good way to teach anybody how to learn.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
But yet they did the same thing and got the same results and continued doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
John, what do you think of what you're hearing from Kevin?
Well, it sounds very familiar, all right. I mean, one of my school pals who sat beside me essentially had a reading and writing difficulty, which was quite pronounced. And even at the age of 10 or 11, whatever it was, I could pick up on it. And yet the teacher still insisted that he would pick him out to read passages out of whatever books. And at one stage, it reached a point where he basically just dropped the book, and I turned around, and he was just crying. Oh. He just literally was crying. And not alone did the teacher not kind of, what would you say, respect the situation. He just basically clobbered him.
It makes your heart bleed. It really does. Josephine, do you think there's a benefit to having this conversation now, or is it painful to listen to and to participate in?
A bit of both, I think. I also remember another time too, like when I couldn't pronounce the Irish words, and I was left up at the blackboard the whole day long because I could not pronounce these words. And to this day, I can't stand the language. I hate Irish, and everything got to do with it.
Because you stood up there with everybody looking at you all day long, being made an example of.
Yes. And I if anyone says to me, can you speak Irish? I say I can't, but I say it with pride that I can.
Aye. All right, John, Josephine, Kevin, thank you all very much. You're very good for calling us.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks.
Oh, no, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
Carmel, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Philip.
So tell me about your time in school.
Well, I was just listening to a lot of it, and I kind of felt, sorry now, I have a bit of a cold, but I felt that the good people didn't get a chance at all today, because there's a lot of schools that people had a lot of problems, and it is sad. I'm very sad about it, but we went to a fantastic school. It's a little school in Rahan, outside Tullamore in County Offaly, run by the Presentation nuns. And now, at the present time, there's only one. Sister Oliver is the only one who's alive who taught me. But there was a lot, 11 of them there when we were going to school in the 60s and 70s, early 70s. But they were fabulous. I mean, they looked after people who didn't have enough. Girls used to come from school, they used to walk. That time there was no buses, of course, so they walked maybe 4 or 5 miles, 6 miles. They'd have breakfast for them when they came, give them lunches if they had no lunches, help out people going on tour. Now, we were fortunate enough to live near the school, or I don't know, unfortunate, but they were loved. They had little treats for us at Easter, they had sweets and everything.
And did they ever resort to corporal punishment in their teaching, or were they able to do that?
It was the odd slap. I mean, a slap in your hand. And I know that whenever I got a slap, I deserved it. You know, at that time, corporal punishment was in anyway. But I've seen nobody, and honestly, hand on heart, I've seen nobody overslap or anything. You just get a slap in your hand if you did something wrong, and I mean, we were devils down there, and God helped them, they had their hands full, but they were great. And every July, they have the breaking up school time. They had a big party for us all in the front lawn of the convent, where they made sandwiches and tea and sweets and apples, and they were great.
And when you say that whenever you got a slap, you deserved it, what do you mean you deserved it?
Yeah, I done something very bold.
Right.
I mean, we broke a window.
Okay.
And we threw a ball.
And not accidentally.
Nothing. Well, we were throwing the ball hard, and we threw it from one window and went through another window, and we broke 2 windows. And I said, and yes, when the nuns did slap it, and we all got a couple of slaps each, just to let us know that we shouldn't have done it.
And sorry, slaps with their hand or slaps with a ruler?
With a ruler.
Okay.
Yeah. But honestly, it was lovely, and I'd hate. I've meant to do it a few times with all the different things about the nuns and everything. I just said there are special ones there. The nuns in Rahan were great. Sister Carmel was a nun. She used to come out in her whole gear, in her whole nun gear, and play camogie with us. And she used to be. She must be sweating, but we played camogie, and she was a great little camogie player from Galway. And she came out and played with us. And Sister
they sound like lovely people, Carmel, but I'm just wondering now, if you heard of any teacher slapping a child because they had broken a window, now, in 2014, what would your attitude be?
No, corporal punishment is gone now, and you don't do it now. At that time, it was of the time. And look, it didn't even hurt us. It just reminded me I did something wrong.
Oh, no, it was more hurt pride and humiliation, and it was meant to put you back on the straight and narrow, but it was meant to teach you through fear, as opposed to sitting down and saying to you by way of reason, now listen, you've broken something, it's going to have to be paid for. There was no reason for you to break it. It wasn't your property. You should show respect for other people's property. Would that not have had exactly the same effect as that slap on the wrist?
Yeah, you got the slap. Yeah, everyone got it. Whoever got, there's 2 or 3 of us involved. But on top of that, you got a little talk to about. We didn't have to pay for it, but we got to talk to about minding people's property, and they were great like that for giving little talks like that.
Okay.
They were, honestly, I wouldn't say one word about them, because I would go down, and I know a lot of the girls when they go down to go for it. Sister Oliver is the only one who's alive now. She got Person of the Year there in Offaly a few years ago, but they're just great. Everyone goes to visit them even.
All right, Carmel, thank you very much for your call. Fair play to you.
Just put them on the map because they were just fantastic.
And you've done that. Well done.
Talk to Joe.
Tell me something. How strong was your reaction to seeing the teacher that had abused you again many years later?
Well, I was at a fundraising event and I wasn't aware that he was going to be there. And the next minute he was brought up on stage and the hair stood up on the back of my head. I don't know where this came from or where this reaction came from, and I just had to get out of there.
You got up and you left the room?
I got up and left the room, absolutely.
Had you seen him at all since you had left school?
No, and it was probably 32 years, I estimate, that I had last set eyes on him.
You know, particularly, if you were just listening to Marilyn there and talking about that pain in the pit of her stomach, when you have a physical reaction to something, that there's some seriously deep-seated emotions going on and governing what happened. What had this man done to you?
Well, ultimately, he was a physical abuser within the school. And my strongest memory is we were in an examination hall and he was looking for silence, and we were 13 or 14-year-olds, and, we didn't clam up as quick as we could, and he picked me out and he brought me up in front of practically the whole school and, slap across the face, and it was embarrassing and humiliating, but he was very vicious.
And to others, what did he do? What did you see him doing?
Well, he would have done similar, and he was notorious with a leather strap.
And how long did you last in the school?
Well, I went through the same school up to primary cert and then into the junior cycle. But at the end of the junior cycle, I had to get out, so I moved from that school to Waterford Regional Technical College, which had just opened up as a 5th and 6th year cycle at that time. And the total difference in the teachers, they were so supportive. But unfortunately, I had lost the whole concept of education at that stage.
Of course you had. Were you far behind?
It just put fear into me, that no matter what you did, you were wrong and you got punished. So it was not a good educational experience.
And how far behind were you? I mean, were you reading and writing properly at junior cert level?
I was. I mean, the situation that transpired, in fact, I did my intercert, as it was called then, and the teachers, they were so negative that my mum actually re-enrolled me into the local technical school back into first year. And here I was back in first year after serving 3 years in school, and I ended up, I was practically teaching the younger guys until the junior cert results came out, and I got 2 honours, much to everyone's surprise.
Wow, well done. Did you go back to education later on in life?
Well, in my 20s, I discovered that education was really, really important. And without education today, I certainly wouldn't be where I am. And, it has enhanced my life, and I would certainly point out that people learn different. There's different learning styles, but punishment for learning is not a way of educating, and that's the way we were educated. We need to, as the old Irish saying goes, "Mull na hoig agus chuckasheed." So in other words, you've got to praise people and be positive about the education.
Absolutely. Encouragement is really, as we've said time and time again throughout the course of this week, the only thing that works. Brendan, good afternoon. How are you?
How are you? Oh, thanks, Philip.
Brendan, in your case, times were hard in your house and your mother patched the backside of your trousers. What did the brother do when he saw it?
I'm cringing when I'm even thinking of this. He marched me from class to class and made me bend over to show the patch in the arse of my trousers.
And what did he say?
It was just a way of breaking me. I'd come from a national school where we were encouraged to sort of ask questions, and then I went to the CBS and it was the very opposite. There was, don't ask questions, we'll tell you.
My God, you go to a place of learning and you're not allowed to ask questions. I don't understand. When he was bringing you from class to class, what excuse had he in his own mind for doing this?
I don't just because I would ask questions. I was classed as being disruptive, and this was a way of breaking me. Very simple, and I have to say, he fairly well succeeded. I'm cringing while I'm even thinking of it, and it's 54, 55 years on.
Yeah.
And I'm cringing while I'm thinking of it.
And what did it do to that boy, to that younger Brendan?
Well, it succeeded in making me extremely rebellious. I got into trouble with the law. I took fairly well. I was well on the way to being an alcoholic, and I was only about 15 or 16 years old. It was just, I'm actually, to this day, I'm cringe when I think of it. It never went away. It broke my self-confidence for a start off, which I didn't have an awful lot of at the start off.
Yeah. But Brendan, why do you end up feeling embarrassed for something that he should be ashamed for?
Yeah, it's just, you tell any 14 or 15-year-old when something like that happens that it's not their fault. You know, you're at that stage where you're in transition from, you're starting to smell yourself, if you know what I mean. And it completely broke me.
Were your parents of any support?
There was my father was an alcoholic. They didn't take much interest in anything. And my mother at that stage, we were a large family, and I was the youngest. So she was fairly well broken at that stage,
Yeah. And was your dad's alcoholism serious?
Extremely.
Drink the whole paycheck serious?
Yeah, well, he was a guard, and he couldn't be touched, so there was nothing even the law would do, if we called the local cops when they saw him, they said, he was a ranking policeman, so they wouldn't touch him. So what happens is sort of the downward slope on that was that I then used to sleep in the trains in Fairview, and
So you went on the Mitch. You went on the Mitch, and you just went and slept on the trains and travelled up and down the track all day.
No. At night time you sleep in the trains and stay away from home, and
all right.
Generally then fell in with, how would you say, people who were of a like mind, because there were a few around at the time, and got into trouble with the law. And
you say got into trouble with the law, Brendan, but you know something? I mean, when you're faced with that level of injustice, is an act of rebellion not exactly the kind of thing that saves you, that helps you preserve some sense of yourself?
Yeah, but that's in the early 1960s, you try and explain that any policeman.
Sorry, Your Honour, my act of rebellion was justified on psychological and emotional grounds. All right, yes.
As far as they were concerned, I was just a little gouger. There was nobody asked the question: was there an underlying problem?
How much of a gouger were you? How much trouble did you get in?
I got into fights. Somebody looked at me crooked. I was the fastest gun in the West.
Yeah.
And as well as that, I started drinking I don't drink now, but at that stage, it was just one of that. I mean, there was probably an awful lot more kids in the same. There was nobody there who asked the question, why was your homework not done? And you couldn't say to somebody, well, he was drunk as a skunk last night, he was wrecking the house.
Was there a turning point for you, Brendan? Because you're obviously, even though you say you're cringe now and you're embarrassed to recall all of this, you've put it in some kind of context, if you're able to call us now.
The turning point, I'll tell you two things. I'd have to say a word to the government. They are doing away with the Reserve Defence Force. That taught me discipline.
Okay.
But the FCA, and I don't want to say this because you probably hear me.
The love of a good woman.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you say that?
It's just...
what did she do for you?
Put me on the right track.
Who is she?
If I say that, people know exactly who I am.
Right, okay. But is she the love of your life? Or was she?
Well, no, she still is after 50-odd years.
Good.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional here.
Of course you are. It's emotional stuff, Brendan. But anyway, this woman and the army put you on the straight and narrow, yeah?
Yeah.
And repaired the damage done by this one man. Or were there other brothers?
I don't know, just the one. We had a teacher in national school who was absolutely fantastic. You know?
But isn't it just such a perversion to take a young, bright, questioning kid who wants to know why everything around him is the way that he is, and to beat that out of him, to turn him then into a young social misfit and ne'er-do-well?
Yeah, that's like it. It's very hard. As I say, it's 50-odd years on, and you look back and you say, had that not happened that way, where would I have gone in life? In national school, I would have been classed as probably one of the top 3 in the class. And I went to the secondary school and came up against this. It totally turned my personality changed. I became rebellious. I became, as I say, somebody looked at me crooked, I'd start to fight.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was experiencing in my home. I mean, violence was fairly common.
From your father?
Yeah, he was a fairly violent alcoholic.
Just when he was drinking?
There's 3 names of house devil, you know.
Yeah. Brendan, hold on the line there. Let's talk to Dorothy. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hello. I'm fine, thanks.
Tell me, Dorothy, it was forgetting the words of the Our Father that landed you in trouble first with your teacher.
Well, actually, I was spent 2 terms in a national school in 1936 when I was 9, and I've never forgotten it. The most awful trauma of seeing people going up to get caned. Have you ever seen a cane?
Uh-huh.
It's a swishy thing with a handle, and she used to hash it down on them, and they'd be coming back down towards their desk with their hands up under their other arm and screaming with pain, crying and weeping. And I used to think, how can they bear to give her the satisfaction of seeing that? And I was okay. And then one day, I was told to stand up. We were in long benches with long desks in front of us. And she said to say the Lord's Prayer, something I'd done since I was an infant. And my mind went completely blank. I couldn't say a word. And I was told to come up. I went out and hold out my hand. And she whacked it down, and I looked at her. I was determined not to cry. And I went down and sat at my desk. And, my hand was still red and swollen after the weekend. I mean, it wasn't just a tap now I'm talking about. And there was one boy who couldn't spell. I imagine he was dyslexic. And there was dictionary once a week. And every time there was dictionary, he was beaten because he couldn't spell. Now, how that was supposed to... I was so sorry for him. And another child of 6, she broke the cane over his hand the first day at school.
Good God.
And he was only 6 years old.
Dorothy,
I'm talking about all small children now.
Yeah.
There were no big rough boys or anything in the school at the time.
Did this sadistic witch, because it really is the only thing to call her, did she use caning just as a teaching aid? It wasn't even a disciplinary aid.
It wasn't a disciplinary. We knew, funny, I'd heard people talking, adults talking and saying there was not supposed to be any corporal punishment for pure failure at lessons. But that was what she beat them for, failure at lessons. It wasn't, there was no indiscipline in the school because it was quite a small school, and I think we were brought into it because the numbers had been going down and they had press the teacher or the parents to send their children to the school.
Okay.
We had been at a little private school where there were never any punishments.
And was there any other teacher there? Was there any other...
Well, there was, I think there was a teacher for the very, very small children in another room, but she was on her own,
and what about the priest or an inspector? Did anybody ever arrive?
Well, it was the Church of Ireland school. The clergyman used to come once a week, I think, and she'd know when he was coming, and she'd put the cane up on top of the cupboard. And
She'd hide
I don't know,
the
he
cane.
must have known what was going on, but he was an elderly man, and maybe he didn't feel able to do anything. I don't know. But, I mean, many, many years later, I got a request from the town to say that she was retiring. I was horrified to hear that she was still teaching. I thought she wouldn't have been allowed. And would I like to subscribe to her? I was going to write and say I had the greatest pleasure in refusing, but my brother wouldn't let me. But
That's an interesting thing, though, Dorothy.
I never forgot her.
Why would your brother not let you? I mean,
well, I don't know.
It was wrong what she did. It was absolutely wrong.
Terrible.
Why should there be any equivocating about it?
I don't know, but I mean, I know she had family afterwards, I think, but I mean, I wouldn't like to mention names or anything, but she really was a monster, is all I can, when I was there. But I was only there for 2 terms, and in later years I tried to say, well, there were positive things that happened in the school. One of them was that they discovered I was very short-sighted, and I wasn't just stupid because I couldn't see the board. I used to always think I was stupid because I couldn't see a blackboard.
Okay.
And
but in fairness, diagnosing somebody...
There was a medical examination that happened about once every 2 or 3 years, and I happened to be there.
Okay.
And they discovered that I needed glasses. But
well done you for putting a positive spin on it, because, frankly, it doesn't deserve it, really, does it?
Well, I did. I mean, I knew I had to put a positive spin on it, because it was... I mean, I did get the glasses, and that was a great help to me. And... but I went back to the other school then, and there was no problem.
Okay.
But the...
Let's bring in Ger here, if you don't mind, Dorothy, one second.
Yeah.
Ger, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Philip. How are you?
Your teacher sounds like a right one, telling you that you were possessed by the devil, no less.
And I was a freak.
And a freak?
Yeah.
And this wasn't said affectionately or jokingly, no?
No. Because I was right with my left hand. They tried everything to stop me right with my left hand. They tied it behind my back, thought I'd get tired of it, and I would start right with my right hand. So sometimes when I left the house to go to school in the morning, I wouldn't go. I'd get in the fields and I'd stay there until I was going home. I was getting fed up with it. So as time went on anyway, I went back again, and time went on anyway, so change of class came in the school, so I had a different teacher, a male teacher. And we were doing something with a compass one day, and I was doing it the opposite way with the compass, being left-handed.
Uh-huh.
And he got mad with me and everything. He ran down and pulled it out of my hand and stuck it into the back of my hand. He drew blood with it. So he did.
He stuck it into your hand?
Stuck it into my hand.
He stabbed you?
Stabbed me with it. And at the end of the day, anyway, I was going home, and he called me back, and he put his hand in his pocket, and he gave me a shilling. And he says to me, "Don't tell your mother." Well, my hand was ever swelled up. I did tell my mother, and my father went down to the school too.
Hope you kept the shilling as well, Ger.
I did keep it. But my father went down to the school to him anyway, and he said to me, "You won't have any trouble with him again," which I didn't.
What did he do to him?
I don't know. It's choice words, I think. But anyway, there ended that in school and everything like that. That passed on. But as I got older, this left-hand business is still around. As I got older, then I went doing a welding course, electrical welding course, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the supervisor was looking in over my shoulder. And I asked him what was the problem. He said none. He never had a left-handed fellow welding before it. And he never see a left-handed fellow welding. So I never had any problem with it. I welded away. I'd done the thing and passed it and done all that. But
the equipment wouldn't be in any way different, would it?
No, it wouldn't. It's just like with a right hand, you're working away from yourself. But with a left hand, you're pulling, kind of welding into yourself. Do you get me?
I don't, to be perfectly honest with you. But does it make things easier, Ger?
It doesn't make it easy. I couldn't see any differences. I can't see any difference in being left-handed or right-handed. It never gave me any problem, but it seems to give the teachers and other people problems.
It did indeed. I was reading about this just the other day, and it was really, really interesting that they did a study, not of that many people, but I think they took 11 people who had been left-handed, who had been like you, and were forced to change to use their other hands. And they had gone on to do that in later life, and they studied their brain patterns while they were writing with the brain patterns of those who had written with their right hand naturally all their lives. And it was really interesting that the entire left-hand side of their brain of the people, the left-handeds who were writing with the right hand, was much more quiet. There was much less going on because they were still having to consciously suppress that side of their brain from working so that they could use their wrong hand to write with. Were you allowed eventually to use your left hand then?
I was in the end, yes. But like as it goes, I had brothers and sisters and they weren't left-handed. But I have a son and daughter and they're completely left-handed, same as myself.
That's a strange coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah. So I don't have a problem. But as I was telling your researcher there, I was in a restaurant one time and the girl laid out the table with the forks and knives for a right-hand person. And I switched them around and he sent her back again to set the table. And I thought I was left-handed. I said, all right. And she said he sent her down. So I switched them again. And as she was walking away, he pointed back to her. So I got up and I went up to him and I said to him, I don't have a problem with it. I said, I'm left-handed. I don't have a problem shifting them around. I said to him, but you seem to have. He looked at me as if I had horns and walked away. So he did.
That's bizarre behaviour. I mean, particularly to a paying customer as well.
Yeah, but I found that at weddings too, and dinner dances, any kind of a function, you'd be sitting across the table from people, and you'd be using a fork to them, and he'd ask you, how do you do it? I'd say to him, too simple when you know how.
Oh dear. All right, Ger, listen, thank you very much for your call. And
right, thanks for your time. I just heard your listener there, your person on there yesterday left-handed. I said I'd just throw it into the arena and see how it'll go.
You're good for calling. Thank you very much. And thank you also
thank you very much. Right, bye-bye.
To Brendan, to Brian and to Dorothy. We'll do this.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.
John, good afternoon.
Hi, Philip.
You had... Not at all, John. Do you know what? The one thing we have learned throughout the course of this week is that it seems to be good to talk about this.
Well, that's the one thing that I like to get out there to people. I'm a man in my 60s. I didn't talk until my 40s. And I was abused by a family member and by a teacher between 10 and 12 years of age. And it destroyed my life. Yes, I functioned, I got my job, I had a business, got married, had children. Never talked about it. Unfortunately, it broke, it destroyed me, it destroyed my marriage. And it was only then that I started talking. And I haven't stopped talking since.
How did it destroy your marriage?
I suppose you hide a secret, this hidden part of your life that just doesn't come out. And you do things that maybe you wouldn't do in a normal circumstance.
Like what, John?
You have affairs and the rest, you know. But it's
and when you were having those affairs, when you were running away from the intimacy of your wife, what did you feel that you were looking for?
I suppose approval. And I'm not saying she didn't approve of me. Like, she was a wonderful woman, wonderful mother to my children, wonderful everything. But me, inside me, that inner child, that young 10-year-old,
you needed
was
affirmation.
Hurting so bad, was just, and, people say, oh, can't you move on? I hate that word. It's the most horrible. You can't.
No.
And even though I'm in my 60s and I'm talking since I was 40-odd, and I have to give great credit to the Rape Crisis Centre, because I went to them for a couple of years, and the work they'd done with me was wonderful. But it's still there. It'll never, you can never, ever get rid of it. It's ingrained deep, deep down. You live with it. There was actually recently a report came out and it said men that were abused in their younger lives, between 50 and 60 odd years of age, they will struggle with their finances, they will struggle with their businesses or finding work, they will live in lesser accommodation, and I tick all the boxes.
It's the injury and the insult that just keeps on causing pain throughout a life, because obviously your ex-wife suffered as a consequence. Did you have kids?
We had 5.
And
wonderful. Unfortunately, one little girl died. I have 4 of the most wonderful children. I have spoken to them about it, but I don't think they understand the seriousness of it. And people on the outside that this has never happened, that have been reared in a normal life, gone to school, reared up, get their job, they don't understand. And people just don't understand how it destroys you. It destroys you.
What has helped, John?
Talking.
Did you ever confront your abusers?
I did. The family member apologised, but I will say their actions afterwards didn't, it's very easy to say sorry. I suppose we all say sorry in our daily lives, if you close the door and somebody, sorry. But it's the meaning, it's the actions that follow the word sorry.
I know. It can be the most meaningless word sometimes, really, can't it? But at the same time, when that family member said it, did any kind of weight lift off your shoulders?
I thought it would, but it didn't. I felt awkward at the time or before in his company. I don't anymore because I've moved on. There's the word, move on. I don't allow the power. I've taken the power back to myself. So in situations, not that there are many, because I don't.
And what about the teacher? Did you confront the teacher?
Unfortunately, he had passed away. He had died.
And did that leave the issue then unresolved for you, or would it have made any difference at the end of the day?
I don't know, but I suppose to confront somebody and see what they say, would there be something, But the one thing I just screams out at me is, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Ireland was a horrendous country, for abuse, sexual abuse. Oh my God, the amount of people that I have come across that are in the same situation as myself. I'm lucky. I've been able to maybe rise above, and thanks be to God I have a job and I'm working. But I see so many people will never work, will never function as normal human beings. Their lives are just destroyed.
And did any of the affairs ever work out, John? Did you ever get love or affirmation, or were they just ultimately hollow experiences too?
No, because, and this is the one thing, the woman I was married to, she was the most wonderful, wonderful partner. Excuse me now. Mother to my children, wonderful. But, the trust was gone, and that was it. The trust was gone.
John, you're very self-aware now. Is there absolutely no hope of a reconciliation there?
No, unfortunately, no. But
and do you think that she ever fully understood you and your reasons for behaving in this way? I'm not excusing the behaviour, but it's understandable. It's human.
Yeah, but no. She wouldn't have had. Maybe, I suppose, if during our marriage, if I had talked about it.
Yeah.
Maybe, but not when it's over and done, no.
And the consequences, I'm speculating, I'm going out on a limb here now, but the consequences in your children's lives of the absence of a father figure then, I mean, have you seen a second generation ending up being affected by this?
That is the frightening thing. It scares the hell out of me because I'm all of the time, I spend a lot of time with them. I speak to them every day. people say, God, you're ringing them again. Why? But that's my way of compensating. But I want to, and I'm hoping to God that the will come through, losing the happy family situation.
Are they girls or boys, John?
They're both. They're mixed.
And have the girls managed to find good, stable, loving partners, or are they ended up in relationships that you'd worry about?
In relationships that I worry about.
God.
And the one thing that
is that something that you bring on yourself as well?
Yes. 100% every day. That guilt. Some guy said to me, some counsellor said to me one time, Tom, you've got to get rid of the whip. Stop lashing yourself.
But that'll be hard too.
And you will do that because the guilt is there. But it's not what you've done, it's what's done to you. But you take it on board that it's your guilt.
And all because some poor little boy was cynically and horribly abused by people who should have been looking after him. 2 generations later, there are relationships that could possibly end up falling apart, causing God only knows what pain to even possibly 3rd generations.
The one thing I keep saying to my children is talk. Talk to their partners. Talk. Let there be nothing hidden. You mightn't like it, you mightn't like the answer you're going to get from them, but talk it out. And the same thing I'm saying to people, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever ages they are, if they've been abused, for God's sake, find somebody, talk to them and talk. Because that is the only way. As I said earlier, it'll never go away. But at least you'll get some relief from it.
I'm convinced. Thanks very much for your call, John.
God bless.
Take care of yourself. Adrian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Philip.
Was it a ground floor or a first floor windowsill that the brothers were putting you out on?
First floor window, a big old building with high ceilings. So when I was on the windowsill, I would have been about 20 feet off the ground.
What on earth were they thinking?
I don't know. But he was the most sadistic person that you could ever hope to avoid. He was very, very cruel. I was only 9 years of age. And I can see that as I'm standing on the sill, I can see that vision in front of me as I'm sitting here talking to you now. It has never left me.
And was this supposedly a teaching aid, or were you being disciplined for having been bold?
To be honest with you, I can't remember exactly why I was put out there, but whether I didn't know what question he was asking me or whatever, but he was very cruel with his discipline. Another day he just brought me outside the door onto the landing and hung me upside down holding one leg. And I was up a fair height because it was 2 flights of stairs, and that was supposed to be discipline as well. So he was a very cruel man.
Let me take a wild guess at how much learning you did in that kind of atmosphere.
Very little. None, because you can imagine at 9 years of age we were so frightened. Everybody in the class was so frightened. I wasn't the only person getting beaten up, but the first thing I would do most days when I get to the school is just head for the toilets and vomit.
Oh, and
that was the start of most days, and it was just fear for the whole time you were in that school after that.
Was there any solidarity with those who were also afraid, or were you all just so isolated in your fear?
At 9 years of age, I couldn't say there was any solidarity. We probably felt sorry for each other at the time, but no, all we wanted to do when school finished was just to get home as quickly as possible.
And your mum and your dad?
Mum and dad, during that year, I actually missed school on a number of occasions. The only time I missed school, but it was out of fear. And my father found out each time, and he tried as hard as he could to find out what was wrong in school. And we were just so frightened of the brother, and he had told us if we'd ever said anything out of the class that he would just come and get us. And that'll just tell you, I could never tell my father what actually happened.
And this is 1966 you're talking about.
1966.
Yeah, I can hear the anger in your voice now. You know, this is, again...
Philip,
Sorry, go on.
this is the first time I've actually spoken about it, really, except to my wife. I don't normally speak about it, but except when we'd meet occasional classmates that were there, would you believe it, 50 years on practically, we would still talk about what happened.
Why do you not talk about it, Adrian?
I don't know.
It's not your shame, you know.
It's not my shame, no, but I had a good experience in school before that and after that. It was just that at that particular time. And it's amazing, really, because I've had a couple of instances this year, which is almost 50 years later. I went into a local pub, and there was a lad had his back to me behind the counter, and he just turned his neck around to see who was there. And he actually addressed me by the brother's name. He didn't say hello, nothing. That's what he said. And I said, "You weren't in my class, were you?" And he said, "No, we were in the class next door, and we could hear all the shouting and screaming going on."
Oh, my God.
I said, "Why wouldn't anybody do anything about that?" And he just didn't know, you know. But as if by chance then, about 3 weeks after that, I was going through a restaurant, and a lad that I hardly know, wasn't in my class, put up his hand and called me over. He said, "I have some good news for you." And I said, what's that? And he said, "I have the name and address of that Christian brother where he is now." No,
and did you?
Very good reason for knowing it himself, but without.
No. Let's not go into that. But did you use that information?
I'm sitting on it for 9 months, and I don't know what to do with it. But I'm thinking about it all the time.
Well, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I would like to approach him, because he was so cruel to everybody that year. I mean, he was just unbelievable.
The question is, would it do you any good at the end of the day? I mean, let's not care about him and whether he goes to hell or heaven with this on his conscience. The question is it going to be cathartic for you? Is it going to do you any good? Do you think it will?
It's hard to know. I don't honestly know, Philip. I don't know. I just have to think about it another while and see.
Because I mean, what do you visualise happening here when you think about this? Do you see yourself walking in there, giving him hell, and then walking out with a weight lifted off your shoulders, or is it more ambiguous than that?
No, to be honest with you, all I'd like to do if I did go to meet him, I think, is that I'd just like to sit down, man to man, and get him to explain why he hated us so much and why he battered 9-year-old children.
And have you thought about how unsatisfactory it might be if he just shrugs his shoulders and says, "God, I don't know, I never thought about that, I was just a teacher"?
Well, I have thought about that, and I think that probably might be his reaction. I don't think I would just announce myself on his front door. I would contact him and try and make an appointment with him. But that's the way I think I would do it.
Because it might be more frustrating at the end of the day if he's not prepared to recognise that he did something wrong.
Yeah, it's a 50-50 situation. I suppose it could go either way. But I think I will do something about it, to be quite honest with you.
Well, Adrian, either way, once again, it's good to talk, and thank you very much for talking to us.
You're more than welcome, Philip. Thanks for taking the call. Bye-bye.
Talk to Joe.